After scraping through the last 15 years with no talent and no skill, is he really dead? He clawed and hustled for a single scrap of food, only for a truck to kill him at 30. A girl bent over him, anxiety blazing in her eyes as she called him Jink. That name isn't his true name is different. His eyes snapped open to a strange woman looming over him, panic carved into her features. Then relief exploded from her as she cried that Mr. Jink had finally woken. She burst out that he'd suddenly crumpled right before His Royal Majesty. His Royal Highness dismissed the convoy and ordered it deported. She begged that she was terrified and her heart was breaking, but Sato cut her off. The whole thing had gone wrong. The Dzink story shredded his bearings. He spun to the girl and demanded to know who he was and where he was, and she recoiled in horror, desperate to call a doctor. Sadat barreled into her path, snapping for her to stop. He's Dzink non-land, only 14 and already the heir to the Duke of non-land. Whispers say he rode in His Royal Majesty's convoy across the Rosalto Kingdom ever since he was a child. Today, His Royal Highness ordered him banished from the kingdom. The non-land house has bred elite spearmen for generations, and he couldn't master Sujutsu. He courted chaos and started acting cruel. No wonder His Majesty disliked him. Now he's apparently been reborn as this boy. Memories of Sato Jimkuro's entire life slammed into him. Now those memories lived in his head. He'd once devoured a book that claimed rebirth into another world, and this avalanche of memories proved it. A girl named Elsa told him bluntly he'd fallen. Today the master stayed eerily composed. Sato decided Jinkuro's personality still swallowed the room. Dzing snapped at Elsa. Is he being deported? The maid nodded and said the king, after dismissing the convoy, ordered Jinkuro out of the kingdom. They declared Esther the heir. Mr. Jinko was stripped of his aristocratic rank and ordered to leave the kingdom within a month. Elsa buried her face in her hands and burst into tears. Pity tightened her throat for the boy as Dzink's stomach dropped. The old non-land already knew he'd be deported, and beyond the capital lurked monsters that turned exile into a death sentence. Reborn into a new body, he jolted awake and found himself unchanged, his life still unbearably worthless. Dzink resolved to change his clothes and volunteered to help him. Suddenly, a glowing screen materialized in midair before Jinx, shouting that Elsa was a professional servant, level 18. Couldn't understand what was going on. It was like a spreadsheet of statistics from a computer game. Dzink asked Elsa about this. She was baffled and sure her face was flawed, so the screen vanished from her view. Only Dzink could see him. It was electrifying. Dzink's gaze locked on a screen suspended in the air, pouring out information about Maid Elsa. A list of her skills glared at him, and Jink's heart lurched as he realized he possessed an incredible, world-rare talent. He owned a demonic eye. Could this possibly be real? Dzing lunged to pull up his stats, but I still couldn't see a thing on the screen. He locked his focus and decided that since he'd be using this ability non-stop, he had to hammer it into shape, unlike the old games where you barely had to try. The stats slammed into view: level 9, no profession, and every skill frozen at level 1, just jutsu. Physical strength roared at level 25, assessment held firm at level 6, courtesy lagged at level 3, and he carried a vault and a non-land drop bonus. The skill list showed martial arts and magic. Jinka beamed. He was level 9 from the very beginning, and the spear proficiency sat at only rank 1, clearly why everything turned out this way. A brutal truth hit him: everything was ranked. His swordsmanship blazed at S level, while his Sujutsu and cane handling crawled at F. Fire registered as B, water surged to S, air clocked B, earth hit A, alchemy scored A, and healing struck S. Dzink snapped awake to the truth. Evaluation let him read raw stats. His enchantment was S rank, and disbelief ripped through him. Disbelief slammed into him. Only 3 people in the world held this ability, and when Elsa asked what was wrong, he was so deliriously happy he'd forgotten she was even there. He roared at the thought that there would now be only 4 people with this unique power in the whole world alongside him, a twist that would let him strengthen items, and he burned with grateful relief to still be alive in this world. Esther rushed up to Dzink, asked to be led into the room, and blurted that everything was far worse than he'd imagined. Powerless to change it, he did the only thing left, grabbed a fistful of coins and hefted a spear to help him. Mr. Jing's younger brother and one of the few in the house who truly understood him, watched as Jing gripped the spear and thanked him. Knowing he'd never use it, he had no talent for it, he spilled everything about the money to Esther. Link pressed him to buy something, but the city merchants recoil. They won't deal with a man stripped of his aristocratic title. The shopping had to be done, so the younger brother stepped up and took the mission. Jink pressed money into his hand and ordered him to buy everything on the list he'd give him later. The next day, Esther tore into his older brother's errand and snatched every last item off his list. Zink's gaze swept the legion of servants at Esther's command. He's the future celebrity of the non-land house, after all. The younger brother warned Jinku the load would be too heavy for one person. Jink shot back that he already knew. When the final shipment rolled in, DZINK fixed Esther with a stare and announced he would soon leave the country, utterly alone. Banished by his father, it revealed a hidden storage ability, and DZINK begged his brother not to breathe a word about it. He'd only just discovered it, a yawning fault he could hurl anything into. Esther's jaw dropped and she lunged forward, desperate to see what was inside. Ink drenched him. Esther swept her gaze across the magic vault and gaped at its cavernous size. He grinned and announced his brother was doing great. DZINK slammed Esther's status open, his level burned onto the screen, 11th. He owned a storage facility yet seemed oblivious to its existence. The older brother zeroed in on Esther's status and saw it said nothing about her ability to evaluate. The ink bled into Esther, who demanded a tiny vial of his own blood. My brother shot me a hard look and asked if he really wanted to sign a contract. Link's eyes flashed as he confirmed the guess and shot back, if you don't want to, you don't have to. Esther flashed a grin and promised she'd gladly do it if his brother wanted it. Jink thanked his brother and asked him to point out the Adventurers Guild so he could register. Esther beamed as he helped his brother with everything. He insisted it was very simple. As the two brothers strode down the city street, a rain of sneers chased them down the street as passers-by pointed. Everyone knew DZINK non-land was being deported from the country, and many gloated. Jink snapped to his brother that he'd figured it all out, and it twisted his gut. Esther implored his brother to ignore the crowd's clamor. DZINK agreed with him, and the whole city insisted the deportation of a DZINK had sprung from the clumsy schemes of a mediocre aristocrat. Jin caught wind of the rumors and realized the body he'd transmigrated into commanded terrifying power and ruthlessly oppressed the common folk. Nanny Elsa raised him since he was a child, you get it, you can feel for her, but rewind his whole life and it's impossible to understand why Esther will ever miss a brother like that. Jink and Esther reached the Adventure Guild's building, where a brisk receptionist behind the counter snapped a knowing look and showed them how to nick a finger and drip blood onto the guild card to register as G-rank adventurers. She asked the young men if they'd like to wrap up with a quick rundown of the guild. The registration was a tangled jungle of red tape, but DZINK leaned in and listened to the girl. She declared adventurer ranks climb from G to SS, and at first he'll be stamped a G, but if he tries to rejoin, his old rank won't be waiting. Skip guild life for about a month and he'll start bleeding points. He didn't notice the receptionist firing off garbled, lightning-fast sentences to rush them out the door. As evening fell, Jink decided to warm up, unleashing fierce sword drills before dinner. The stats scream he's a sword prodigy, miles ahead of his Seijutsu, and he's rocking an S class. We all believed that if he'd seen his stats sooner, his life would have flipped. Jink swung his sword like it weighed nothing. He pounded the special dummy with fierce blows, then froze. The 14-year-old's body felt shockingly light. Training complete, he clenched his fists. The sole parting gift he could offer Esther was his mastery of alchemy and enchantment. A dangerous plan ignited inside him. He needed Esther's blood, and for his brother's sake he had to execute it perfectly. The non-land mansion's dining room stood primed for dinner, every place set, and at the head of the table Gordon non-land presided, the father of D-Zink. The old man spun toward him, voice like a blade. This is your last meal here, you're leaving tomorrow morning. Zink snapped that he knew. My father asked if he'd ever been a swordsman, and the son confirmed it, firing back, what's the matter? Old non-land fell silent while DZINK declared he'd start packing to leave at dawn. In his room, the young man ripped through the equipment stats. Every piece had to match his level, and his enchantment blazed at the 3rd level. Every piece of clothing crackled with power, 3 power points apiece. Adventure's clothing, trousers, right boot and left boot, Korra's right and left adventure's glove, glasses, and cloak. He ended up with 27 points, his physical strength sitting at 25. Jink reckoned that if he wore every piece, his strength would skyrocket to 52 points. Unease clenched his gut over whether it would work, but he assumed tomorrow would be a blast. He slammed back the mono potion, his mind snapping to Esther's gift. Maybe a forged piece from the blacksmith would suit him. He'd already sold off every last household good. He gripped the spear his grandfather had pressed into his hands, pure mithril, which he'd exchanged for a gold bar, and its hilt had been forged from the extra funds. Mester strode at his brother's side toward the west gate of Ruth's royal capital. He looked Jinku dead in the eye and dropped the bomb. He had to go on alone. Among the few mourners stood Elsa, who urged Jinka to be careful. He flashed a grateful smile and thanked everyone for taking part. He whirled to Esther and blurted that he was grateful for his invaluable help. He pressed a gift into his younger brother's hands, a tattered map in a sleek, elegant box. He whispered for me to let a single drop of blood stain the map later, and told me to open the box only after he'd already slipped out of the country. He vowed he'd carry out those tasks without fail. Then the young man said his goodbyes and slipped out of the city. Mr. bellowed after his brother, pleading with him to take care of himself and praying he'd be all right. He's trekking through Quentin on a journey. After a while he halted and drank in the sweeping scenery, jagged mountains looming on the distant horizon. This was his real beginning. The young man snapped open a map and leaned in, tracing his route with fierce focus. First, he must slog 2 days on foot to reach the border of the post city of Rio, cutting straight through the birch woods. And then they tore through the Mobbit's brand. 4 more brutal days on foot lay ahead. Usually he'd be forced to sleep somewhere along the road to Rio. Right now it's too dangerous for him to be alone. How far can sheer muscle and enchantment carry him? He shot forward with blinding speed. It blew past his expectations. Armed with this skill, he'll storm to his destination by day's end. After an hour of relentless sprinting, DZINK skidded to a stop. Jink, who'd been running non-stop, felt no fatigue at all, his enchantment skill keeping him from tiring. He froze. A shattered wagon train loomed ahead, corpses strewn across the ground. Fear clawed at his throat. He shoved it down and ordered himself to calm, knowing he'd also have to enchant his own mind. A sickening sight met them, and goblins poured in, cackling to the guests that they were the ones who'd slain the merchants. Dzink flashed his sword and lunged into the fray, his trained sight locking onto the goblin's physical strength at the 8th level. One wrong move and he'd be dead too. The young man slashed his blade from right to left. Zelling tore into the monsters with crushing blows. His body moved before thought could catch up. This was Enchantment's raw power. The monsters crumpled, defeated. Jinx sank onto the grass, eyes locked on the glowing info window hovering before him, pride surging. He played it smart and boosted his level with a killer strategy. They expelled him from a fallen country, thank the gods, because his abilities will rocket him straight to his goal. Jinx swept his gaze over the slain merchants and goblins he'd cut down, the air saturated with the bitter, metallic scent of human and monster blood. Death was ordinary in this world. The young man folded his arms and willed the fallen to rest in peace. Once the storm inside him ebbed, he drew a steady breath and braced to press onward. In this world, it's not a crime, even if it happens right after a monster attacks you, and even if you never lay a hand on those unfortunate people's bodies. More monsters would swarm back later to steal their things, so Jink vowed he'd snatch something back. Turn a family heirloom recovered from a corpse into the guild, pocket the reward, and win the gratitude of the deceased's family. DZINK wanted to bolt out of this country faster. He steeled himself to butcher the monsters with his own hands, and a dark-humored proverb popped into his head. Only the one who isn't torn to shreds gets the last laugh. To prove the goblin fell to an adventurer's blade, you yank the magic stone from a monster's ear and heart, or earn it at the guild. Learning every monster that way will chill you to the bone. Heading to Rio, you run into goblins and kobolds. The Jinka don't even flinch. The next morning, Jink's heart leapt when he saw his status had shot up to 20. Enchanted once, a weapon couldn't be upgraded again, so he hauled a mountain of spare swords into the storage room. His enchantment soared to the 8th level, his swordsmanship sharpened to the 8th as well, and he stowed his old sword away as a reserve. An hour later, he barreled into the woods east of the Mabbits River and found adventurers resting there. He flopped onto the jagged trunk of a fallen tree, chest heaving, and knew, no matter how hard he pushed, he couldn't make Marky Mobbits today, so he'd have to spend the night here, and slammed back the mana potion. A desperate plea tore into his ears. Give the potion to the wounded man, he's bleeding out. One adventurer begged for a potion for his friend, but the others turned him away. No one would hand it over, it cost a fortune. Jink burst forward, yelling he had a potion, and would give them as much as they needed. The stats said they weren't bad people, and he refused to watch anyone die. After that, they pressed a potion to the wounded man's lips. Jink had never been this badly injured, and had never tried that potion himself. Doubt gnawed at him, but he gave the potion anyway. It took hold. The wounded comrade jolted awake, pain still lancing through him, and he grasped Jink's hand, thanking him with raw, grateful warmth. He thundered that they were a party bearing the rank Dragon's Tears, and that he, Alexander, was their leader. He shrugged and told Jink to just call him Alec, activated his observation skill, and saw Alexander listed as a level 72 adventure swordsman, rank B. He bore the title Big Brother. Alec hauled out a bulging sack of cash and pressed it into Jink's hands. They swore it was every coin they owned. He figured it would just buy the potion, and DZINK demanded to know what had happened to them. Alex shot back that they'd lucked into a red ogre. The creature revealed itself as an Arank monster, and leader Alec boomed to the young man that he was their comrade's savior. He swore he'd pay him back even if he had nothing left. He might even sell himself into slavery. Jink knew one bottle of potion cost 5 gold coins. Converted to yen, it hit 5 million. The youth's grin widened. That kind of cash screamed power. He understood slavery was legal here, and he even understood why. Zink sneered, disgust crackling in his voice, and snapped at Alec to rise from his knees. An old man shouldn't be anyone's slave. Suddenly, the resting adventurers shot to their feet, weapons bared, and a thundering horde of orcs, driven by the scent of blood, closed in nearby. Zink ripped into the stats and grinned. D-rank orcs, each with physical strength 29. Their numbers didn't faze him because the Jinka was level 20 with physical strength 30. Alec blurted that the red ogre had devoured their supply of good weapons, and Jink swore nobody would lay eyes on it until he slipped out of the country. With no choice left, Jink ripped gleaming swords from his magic storage and tossed them to the adventurers, then barreled into the orcs, his blade felling one and then the other. The adventurers gaped as he cut down D-rank orcs with effortless, brutal precision. The adventure plunged headfirst into battle. The clash erupted into a heart-stopping climax, while fighting Jay. He knew he had to rip through more of these monsters to farm experience, and he couldn't afford to fall for these distracting adventures. Fate hurled Jinka into a duel with an orc general, a B-rank colossus packing a terrifying 68 points of raw physical strength. The monster's rank towered over him, but he ground his teeth and swore he'd figure out a way. Dread and awe slammed into Malik as the man launched himself, alone, straight at the towering orc general. Jink charged the monstrous foe and realized the enchantment had failed him. He'd been foolish to face it alone. Alec dove in to save him and snagged the beast's attention, and now the creature was bearing down on Alec, a deadly threat. Desink vaulted onto the monster's back and rammed his sword into its neck, every ounce of strength exploding through the strike. He swung his sword in a savage arc and severed the monster's head, which skittered and rolled across the ground. The orcs caught sight of their general's grisly demise and bolted. Malik roared to Jink that he was an incredible warrior and instantly suspected Jink held a high rank. The youth snapped that he was still only a 6th-rank novice, then thanked Alec for helping him defeat the orc general. They urged me to pocket the reward. It'll be my payment for the potion. DZINK urged they cleave it clean down the middle. The other adventurers froze, stunned by the young adventurer's jaw-dropping skill. A gasp cut through the crowd. Is that Jink from the Nanland royal family? Shock slammed into the young man. He realized the deportation rumors had already crawled all the way here. He proclaimed he was a fallen member of the Nanland family, and that his name was Jink, but even as he spoke, his aristocratic title was gone. The adventurers gasped. They realized he wasn't the man the rumors had painted. Zink shoved the question at Alec. What are your plans? Alec, the leader, barked that once the escort mission was finished, they'd head straight for the royal capital. They'd planned to stop in Mobbitsburg, but he's been reduced to a slave, chained to his will, and set to follow him anywhere. Zink barked that he shouldn't fix every problem with a shortcut, and Alex shot back that he couldn't thank him any other way. Dzing declared he was heading to Mobbitsburg, pressed whether the person they were supposed to escort was in this city, and begged to join their party as he returned to the royal capital to give his brother Esther some non-land, something that would end their contract of slavery. So he can learn to carve his path as an adventurer on his own. Alex's eyes went wide and he blurted, "Is that it?" Then he swept the young man into a sudden hug and grinned, calling him a very nice guy. One of the adventure girls, bow in hand, locked eyes with Jinka and declared, "This guy is one seriously interesting fellow." After finishing off the orc general, Jink and the adventurers moved towards Mobbitsburg City. They barreled down a road that sliced through the goblin forest, yet not a single orc or goblin had dared show themselves. The forest seemed utterly ordinary until their eyes snapped to the ridgeline, packed with goblin archers. To break out of the forest, he had to tear through a massive army of monsters. Jing barreled forward without a second thought. Alec yelled for him to be careful, and the adventurers twirled nonstop with hands and swords. D-rank fighters poured into the fray. DZINK bristled, convinced they were only squandering their energy. If they're grinding just to snatch EXP and cash, their motive slaps you in the face. I wiped out the colossal goblin horde in no time, and it was almost embarrassingly easy. Seasoned adventurers gaped as the frail youth, pale and slight, moved with lethal precision and outfought them at every turn. Grown men loomed. Jinx whispered, "Maybe it's all about talent," and D's ink weighed his status. His enchantment roared to level 8. The last battle slammed +8 points onto him, and he knew he would be the best player in the world. He unleashed enchantment to supercharge his physical strength, and the cuirass and cloak slammed on another +8. They packed in the same extras, clothes, underwear, even a glove ring, and the adventures finally rested. Reliving the fight, they were blown away. The guy who just joined them was a total legend. A girl strode up to Jinku and declared, "I'm Karen, leader of the Sacred Flame Party." She said she'd been lucky enough to watch him seize victory yesterday. A Bogard, a true hero, stood sentinel beside her, who. He strode up, introduced himself to the young man, and declared he'd never seen anyone like him. They all gaped as he wielded his weapons with uncanny skill. Was he an enchanter? Will, the third member of Sacred Flame, burned to meet Jink too. They dove straight into their abilities, and the bulk art burned into view. An errated sword adventure, level 150. The leader of Sacred Flame, Karen, reigned as a 214th level elf, a miracle-working healer, and a Deadeye S-rank archer by profession. Hitting level 165, he unlocked a game-changing skill, Weapon Evaluation. He snapped at Jinku that his read was dead wrong. When he rechecked the weapon, the gear flared, and his physical strength shot up by +8. He could level several items to the exact same rank at once, the mark of a true enchanter, and the adventurers gaped in stunned silence. They'd already confirmed there were no enchanters on this continent, so they'll put Jink on the spot and offer a fair price for that ability. The young man shot back that he'd be ready, only on one condition, and he would eagerly ask what that condition was. Jink snapped that the skill's owner had to first spill blood onto the enchanted item, and every step had to be flawless. He swore the relic would never be desecrated by shady hands. It was bound for the kingdom of Cal through Mabbitsburg, and so long as he didn't leave the country, he wouldn't hand that power to anyone for any price. The mage snapped a nod, hoisted his cup in a toast, especially as a stake adventurer, and told the young man they were very happy to see the enchanter in their country. Jink blurted he'd never met another enchanter and had no clue what the going rate was, so he could set whatever price he wanted. Jink roared he could enchant gear to grant +8 swordsmanship, +1 sugjutsu, +8 physical strength, +3 courtesy, +2 alchemy, a level 3 assessment and storage. It even held a map for evaluation. My jaw dropped. Dzink wielded those rare skills, and the young man said he was born with them. Then, he fired the question at the magician, and the magician produced a necklace that granted courtesy +3. Sword fencing explodes by 8, the earrings alchemy surges by 2, the shoes boost physical strength by 8, that's it. Using slammed a card bearing a 3 into each of their hands, then forced a mono potion down his throat. I gaped as he slammed back his 5th potion bottle. The young man shrugged. Enchanting devours mana, so I need every last drop. He shoved the map at Karen and asked her to drip blood onto it. She did, and when the crimson spread across the parchment, she stared and gasped. Bogart and Will mirrored each other's moves on the maps, tracing the same routes with sharp precision. The mage's eyes flashed with understanding. This card could only be used for skills. He dangled an extra reward before Jinku if he exposed their extra qualities. Jinku snapped that qualities aren't like skills you can name, they're undefinable, so he said nothing. Some people hide raw, untapped talent, pay him more and joy will light him up, but the young man refused to help a stranger. Dzink raked in a fat payout, thanked the adventurers, and boomed, "This is what an A-rank party is all about." Jealousy burned in Bogart at the sight of him, and Will muttered that it felt a little weird. The man's an enchanter, a heavy hitter, and yet he travels alone. Rumor had spread the adventurers already knew he'd been deported, and Karen jabbed a finger, demanding to know what he'd done because he looked nothing like a criminal. Alex stepped between them and shouted that none of it was true, insisting his friend wasn't like that and ordering them to keep their hands off. He'd only acted awkwardly and was being falsely accused. He clamped his mouth shut about his powers and family. If word got out, they'd be weaponized, so he trusted only a tiny circle. He launched himself toward the Coal Kingdom, oddly relieved he had so few friends to hold him back and dead certain this was for the best. Will swore they'd get him across the border, and the magician spun to Karen, hunting for a confirming nod. The leader of the Sacred Flame confirmed his warning, declaring a swarm of varied monsters prowls the border, but Jink's heart burns with unshakable strength. The young man shot a quick thanks and yelled for them to hurry. Mabbitsburg was only a stone's throw away. Before long, they slammed onto the Colt Kingdom's outskirts at the border of the remote town, and Dzink realized nobody in the city seemed to know him. Grinning, Dzink hefted the enchanted sack of coins in his palm and reveled in its weight, then vowed to spend every coin on one epic shopping spree. He's about to buy the raw materials to forge his products. Earlier, he stormed into the shop and snatched up the finest weapons and armor. The owner whooped at his new purchasing power. Jink warned him bluntly it would take time. He handpicked every weapon and piece of armor with ironclad precision. He lifted a simple yet battle-ready spear and swore to the young man that only in his store would he find all he needed. The shopkeeper rushed to pack every purchase, but Jink flashed a grateful grin, waved him off, and he revealed he owned a storage facility. Deezing hand-picked a spear for Esther that should last him a very long time. He set his jaw and vowed to pour every ounce of skill into enchanting it. At dawn on the outskirts of Mobitsburg, Dizink thrust the gift into Alec's hands and thanked him in advance for delivering it to his brother. Jinka forged quality assessment cards, even crafting one for Alec. The man thanked him, and Jinka watched the man's enchantment hit the 12th level, granting him experience points toward a level up. Then Alec rallied his band of adventurers, and they set off for the capital. That very day at the non-land mansion, the head of the house thundered a single command: Esther will be the heir to the house of non-land. He pushed him to understand and erase Jinka from his mind. Esther sat in his room, replaying every memory of his brother. Rage boiled in my father as he demanded of Esther whether he'd been working the whole time he'd been gone. He begged his son not to do it again. Regret stabbed him for helping Jinku, and old Nonland swore he'd make him pay, and Jink was set to leave the next day. The moment he stepped out, he'd be barred from going out for 50 days. Then he left. She pressed a shimmering potion into his palm and assured him he'd see his brother off tomorrow. Jink wasn't his brother anymore. My father turned on his heel and strode away. Esther pressed his forehead to the cold window of his room, pulse tightening as he wondered what his brother was doing. Was he wandering alone in the forest right now? The disaster sneered, convinced DZINK would slip out of the country alive, and that the escape would score it a massive payoff. Venturers and Jink slammed into the horde of evil orcs as Jink's brother fought with everything he had. Bogger sent another monster sprawling with a savage sweep of his sword. Elf Karen loosed a flawless razor arrow that felled the goblin. Up against adventurers, they were weaklings. I unleashed wind cutter magic and cleaved the orc into pieces. Standing atop a heap of monster corpses, Jinx beamed, "This is what a rank means," and Will replied, "Thanks to the enchantment." He's about to rocket up the ranks. He'd already honed his fire magic into a blazing weapon. He couldn't even conjure a forest fire, Jinx seethed, vowing to overhaul the way he developed his magic. Aaron and Boggard, who'd been racing after the fleeing monsters, stormed back, and Jink thought that the closer they edged to the border. Each new monster they ran into turned the route deadlier. A low-rank merchant or rookie adventurer who dares this trek almost never makes it to the border. Karen confirmed his words with a hard nod, snarling that a C-ranked adventurer wouldn't even make it to the border. Merchants trying to cross higher B-rank escorts or full convoys, and she knows a wyvern lurks deep in the forest. It sometimes stalks the roadside, and the employer might even order them to trap it. Dread tightened Jink's gut at the thought of facing that wyvern now, but Karen chirped there was nothing to fear. The border was already right up ahead. Sure enough, very soon, the party stormed into the border town of Colt. Nervous whispers rippled through the travelers as they braced for trouble, and DZINK's worry flared sharper than the rest. Karen winked at him and shot a grin, telling him not to worry, they'll help him. Boggard swelled with pride, saying they were rank, that Karen was S rank and of noble blood, and that Viscount sat in the local guard, so it's all right. Jink winced, wishing he hadn't had to use physical force, and desperate to pass border control without incident. Suddenly an armed border guard loomed before them and demanded to see their identity cards. My guard's eyes snapped wide. Jinka Nonland's name glared back at him from the map. The youth spat out the truth. He'd lost his status and was a commoner now. He's the same DZNK Nonland. The border guard spat the rumor. He'd left the royal capital 5 days ago, so how did he show up at the border already? What impossible route brought him here? Karen strode forward, hushed the guard with a single sharp command, and explained they'd arrived by carriage. The child had merely been told to leave. She stepped forward and demanded to know what the guard's problems were. The border guard bristled and snapped, "How could a commoner like you dare speak to a knight?" But the moment he learned that, he stiffened and smoothed his tone, suddenly far more polite. The elf leaned in, warning him to mind his words. Does this place actually tolerate rudeness? The knight begged forgiveness, vowed to summon a superior, shot Karen a cold, disapproving look and warned he'd do the talking next time, and Jink also stepped forward to tell the girl not to be rude to them. One guard's voice trembled. Could this be the sacred flame? As the chief strode up to the travelers, he spat out an apology for his subordinate's rudeness and vowed he'd punish him later. The boss snapped at them, asking if they were from the cult kingdom. Why on earth did they march into the notorious Rosalt kingdom, a place where only incompetence reigned? Then he jabbed a finger at Dzink and snarled that the man had served in the convoy, let his status blind him, and tried to poison the head of the family. The charge of attempted murder slammed into him, and he snapped that they'd all eaten at their father's table. the man had looked like nothing more than an extra. A voice cut in, admitting they'd escorted Dzink even though he'd been deported. Authorities ordered him to leave the country within a set deadline and barred him from returning. There's no reason to detain him. The boss grimaced, growling that he'd turned up suspiciously fast. The magician told the chief they'd accompanied him for 3 days and never seen a single suspicious move. He shrugs the man off as no threat. If he could come from the capital in 5 days, he clearly has the skill, and the chief, face folding into deep thought, grudgingly admits it. If he could make it here, we were in the clear. He apologized for wasting the travelers' time and vowed they'd be far more careful the next time they interrogated the nobles. Aaron dared to hope it would be so. Dzink glared at the city and proclaimed, "The kingdom of Cole begins here," and at last he reached the border. The young man grabbed Will and Karen, thanked them, said that security check would have ruined him without their help. Will shrugged it off and demanded, how would Rosalto react if they found out he's an enchanter? They'll either drag him back or kill him. He won't be left alone, so he's got one sharp suggestion for him. They told him to crank the adventure's level up first, no job registration, but his rare enchanter power is his leverage, and the guild will grant him protection. If he registers in Kola, he'll be barred from operating in Rosalta, so Dzink moved to shield himself preemptively, and Well urged him to race straight to the guild. He shot Boggart a quick goodbye as Will swore he'd tell him everything in person, and Boggart agreed. On the way to the guild, the magician grinned at Karen and declared he wanted to craft a healing bracelet. No, he wanted to practice making one. She flashed a sharp thanks, then they burst into the Adventurers Guild in cult robes. The adventurers present recognized Karen at once. Everyone stared. She was as stunning as ever, and the crowd buzzed about the man at her side, desperate to know why she treated him so warmly. The receptionist beamed, congratulated Sacred Flame on their return, and asked what they had today. Well jabbed a finger at Dzink and declared he wanted a professional certificate to raise the boy's rank. They demanded Dzink show his loot, and he shot back, insisting on a space far bigger than the guild office. They spilled into the backyard while the young man yanked at the bag's knot, insisting the goblins had come first. They demanded to know if he had the body in the bag. One woman shook her head and scoffed that only rookies did that, while the other warned Jinka he didn't need to drag the whole corpse to prove he'd slain the monster. Jink ripped the bag open and goblin ears tumbled out, freezing the employees in stunned silence. Then the young man flashed a grin and boasted he still had 10 bags of cobalt and slug parts. He still hadn't ripped the orcs apart. The admins gaped that he put it all together solo, and when Jink dumped his loot, it swallowed half the guild's backyard. He flung his arms wide, beaming as he urged them to accept his work, and the administrators erupted, declaring it had impressively large storage. Goblin magician, 7 bodies strewn. Goblin shaman, 6 bodies scattered. Goblins, 812 bodies heaped. Kobolds, 41 bodies toppled. Slugs, 37 bodies slumped. Work general, 1 body remains. They tallied 119 orc corpses. The Jinku's dismemberment fee ate into the hall, leaving only 24 gold coins and 3 gold bars. Jink barked at me to convert everything into yen. The total hit 3 million yen, and in his previous life as Jink hero, he hadn't even cracked 6 figures. Everything boiled down to raising his rank. Jink had scored enough points for rank C, but to reach rank D or higher he had to pass a test. Dzink asked me to tell you about this test, and the receptionist said that if he was a swordsman then. They had to face off in a sparring session with the examiner. He could take the exam right then. Dzink gave a sharp nod. The girl stepped up to accompany him and waved his friends in. The exam kicked off in Guild Test Arena, and an adventurer's eyes snapped to him. This was the very man the guard had been talking to during the inspection. There he was, the fallen refugee from Rosalt, and I couldn't fathom why Karen was fussing over him when an examiner strode into the arena and barked at Jinka. Is he the one taking the test today? Guildmaster Snow loomed into view, the very man chosen to spar with Jinka. Guildmaster Snow rarely took the examiner's seat. Tonight the stands were packed with spectators craning to see who would face him. Whispers claimed the challenger had single-handedly slain 100 orcs. Many people scoffed. Sparring in the snow and fencing is a straight-up confession of defeat. The crowd had already written the kid off. Then a booming announcement said the rank advancement test was about to begin. So with time running out, the organizers crammed the D and C rank trials into one, and the guild leader locked eyes with his opponent and said he'd heard of him and couldn't wait to test the youth. The referee snapped at Dzink. This test could leave you seriously injured. Injury is a real risk during it. Karen roared from the podium, telling him not to worry and swearing anything that happens will heal him, while an admirer sitting on the podium ground his teeth. Jealousy clawed at him. He wanted Karen's healing for himself, so he silently prayed the guild leader would kill that asshole. The referee slammed his whistle, threw the match wide open, and dared the opponents to clash. Snow snarled that if Dink refused to strike first. Then he sprang on the offensive. Snow lunged at the youth with savage force, only to be stunned by the kid's blinding speed and unbreakable defense. The sword felt alive in skilled hands. The audience still sensed the guild master seizing the upper hand, and envious onlookers roared for Snow to finish him off. Drink's pulse hammered. This was the first time he'd ever clashed blades with a human, and monster fights were child's play compared to the storm erupting now. The guild leader had warned sparring never ran past 3 minutes, yet this guy's spirit still roared on. Snow hadn't felt that kind of fire in years. Zinku's turn to attack. He rocketed at the examiner like a thunderbolt while Snow scrambled to defend himself. Jink stared at his status. No wonder his swordsmanship blazed at the 104th level. He was a genius swordsman, and Jink knew that if he made a mistake, his opponent lunges immediately with a one-yan. Snow slashes him with a sword and revels in it. Karen leaned to the friend beside her, voice razor-sharp. The fight's only just begun, and DZNK's already been wounded. Her friend snapped back. He's not a bad kid. He's been pushed to keep moving non-stop and doesn't even get a breather. Karen concluded not even Jinku could topple the guild master, and Snow's only human. His stamina would snap. Jink's breath hitched as he watched him unleash technique after technique, every move textbook perfect, and the young man's veteran facade began to crumble. A hard, sudden truth hit him. He could land a blow with his sword. Snow hadn't expected the fight with the adventurer to drag on this long, yet the guild leader still believed it would be over soon. Jinka's swordsmanship barely hit level 27. He'd have stayed out of this fight, but he had an enchantment. That skill let the Jinku rush the examiner without a shred of fear. The youth lunged, and Snow paid the price. The DZINK blade sliced open the examiner's side, sending the stands into a burst of shocked screams. Snow was crushed so badly he had to tap out. The judge declared DZINK non-land the winner. Shock ripped through the crowd. It was the first time they'd ever seen Snow hurt, and nobody could believe a kid like Desink had beaten him. Lonlin's eyes widened in baffled shock. Stunned, they were surprised too. Karen exploded into the arena, offering healing to the guild head, and he refused. He crowed that a single potion would mend the wound, and Snow's jaw dropped. He'd just been utterly beaten by a child. Then rushed to Jinku and said that she would heal him as a prize for winning. The young man replied that he was lightly wounded. From the secret stands, Karen's admirer burned with hatred as he stared at the picture, while the magician strode down to Jinku, boasted he'd crushed the so-called genius and guild head, and demanded I spill my secret. Jinku shot back that it was all due to the enchantment. Mage boasted he'd won by his own powers and called it a fair victory, then leaned in and asked what level the young man's swordsmanship was. When Snow found out Jinko was level 175, he screamed that the guy was a monster. There are only 3 enchanters like that in the world, so he must be the 4th. It was announced his abilities are now part of the sacred flame, and Jinko even wields the score ability. Snow stared down at his card and snapped that it was proof, then scanned his stats with razor focus. Jink spun to him and admitted Snow was terrifyingly strong. Without that enchantment, he never would have beaten him, and the young man watched the guild leader's expression shift. He waved it off, claiming he'd only put in a little effort and would learn his lesson. The guildmaster slams down the verdict, enchanter and appraiser. Hands shot up and cheers cracked the air as they hailed Jinka for blasting him into the preliminary rank of C, and the young man spun to the magician and demanded, "What does preliminary rank mean?" He halted and said enchanters can rocket up to S rank. If someone with that power were left low-ranked, it would spell disaster for everyone. These are just security measures. Jink was branded a temporary C, spun on Will and the Wildermont and demanded, "If I can raise my rank that easily, why make me take this test?" The magician replied that there were reasons for it. That rare profession is an irreplaceable human resource. If he can't defend himself, they'll station a guard at his side who shadows him wherever he goes. We had to test his combat skills, so the place swarmed with onlookers, and Zink snapped, "Why are you helping him?" He snapped that he was just wondering where he'd end up after leaving the country, and what would happen if he dared use his abilities. As an enchanter and appraiser, he's a formidable player. He might even claw his way to SS rank. Jink leaned in, curiosity burning. Is there a rank higher than S? The magician's smile curled. Of course there is. SS rank makes him untouchable. No one can command him. He stands toe-to-toe with castle lords and country rulers, and a storm of experiences lies before him. Does he dare try to achieve it? Deasing snapped his eyes shut, replayed his deportation, felt contempt boil in him, and relived his escape from Rosolt. He vowed to flaunt every power through his enchantment, grinned at the idea of SS ranks as the carriage, guarded by a special escort, crept along the forest road with the crew trapped inside. He dove headfirst into the mission and struck a formula that would finish the job, and with the exam still half a month away, he was sure he could wrap everything up in time. Guards' screams slammed into him. He knew they were under attack. Kobolds were swarming outside, and the warriors held fast, never easing their defense of the Jink against those monsters. The young man vaulted from the carriage, resolve burning as he surged to help the knights cut down the monsters. It was the perfect chance to test your water magic skills. Zinks hurled a magic water orb at the cobbles, but the stones shrugged off the spell. His first attempt failed. He steeled himself, locked his training into his bones, and pictured the water balloon not as a toy but as a leaden, hurtling ball. Round 2 delivered, the ball slammed dead-on into a monster. In the end, the cobbles buckled under the human's ferocious onslaught and bolted. Jink whooped, electrified by the sudden leap in his magic. The enchantment explained it. He'd had water magic from the very start, so he forced himself to aim with razor-sharp care. One misfire and he'd have shattered the trust of the people counting on him. A convoy member mouthed an apology for interrupting his studies and warned they had to protect him, but Jink waved them off. He was just practicing magic, cramming for an exam as they sped toward the Coal Kingdom's capital. 2 weeks ago, after brilliantly passing the test, Jink, Karen, and Will burst into Count Brando's mansion, were met by attendants who announced everything was ready, and Will declared they were staying at the mansion tonight. The magician boomed, "Count Brando's a legend, nothing like those haughty nobles who lord themselves over everyone." He declared he'd raised him as a kid, and argued that keeping a connection to someone like that wasn't a bad idea. Jink and the gentleman from Sacred Flame were led into a sealed private room. Zinks strode up and locked eyes with Count Nicholas Brando of the Coal Kingdom in person. The Count told him to speak to him directly if needed, and the young man replied that, despite being S-rank, he still knew very little and asked to be called simply Zinks. The nobleman, surprised by his courtesy, clasped his hand. The Count swept the entire company to the table and beckoned them to dive into the sumptuous feast he'd prepared just for them. He sent them off with a warm, "Enjoy your meal." Zinks savored every bite like a feast after the camp's canned rations, and the Count leaned forward, asking what he planned to do next after escaping Rosolt so successfully. He snapped that he'd flee the Rosold Kingdom, head to the Cult Kingdom, and claw his way up the ranks. And then he plants himself in the Yamato Kingdom, enrolls in the kingdom's high school at just 14, and stuns everyone by snagging an S-rank way earlier than anyone expected. The Count's blood ran cold. S-rank wasn't just power, it was a noble title. Even if he fled to Yamato, wouldn't Rosalto's hunters still come for him? Zinks shot back that he refused to be chained to one spot. He wanted to roam the world and soak up every new experience, and the Count's approving nod made his satisfaction obvious. He urged Zinks to head for Koralt, the kingdom's capital, home to the Colt Kingdom's most prestigious high school. Entry is brutal, but he could pull it off, and if he wanted real experience, Koralt was where he'd get it. He's got to bolt to Hamel, the nearest city perched right above the Colt Kingdom's largest dungeon, a chasm plunging 84 levels deep, and nobody's ever touched its bottom. Monsters of every size swarmed into that place nonstop. Jink grinned, sure this was a real adventure. Karen snapped, "If you want to go to school, you take the entrance exam first," and Jinka flashed a confident grin, swearing everything would be fine. He'd bury himself in study on the road to Koralt. Karen stared, stunned by the steel in his resolve. The Count suggested the young man introduce him to an adventuring party. Brando pitched the plan to Jinka. When he rides to the capital, he'll cut through the estates of his familiar aristocrats, hole up at his Koralta mansion, and introduce himself on his behalf. What did Jinka think? His son, barely a year younger, is eyeing the entrance exam too. The Count dared to hope that, if fate allowed, they'd become friends. Jink admitted he wasn't used to it, a tight unease nodding in him. His memories had been a loop of identical days, but right now he crackled with raw enthusiasm. Every day he devoured fresh knowledge. He seized Count Brando's suggestion without hesitation, then poured out heartfelt thanks to the Sacred Flame members for the invaluable help they'd given. Aaron declared it a pleasure doing business with him. The girl vowed they'd rendezvous at the Dragon's Tears and return to Rosolt, and once their dealings with their brother were settled, they'd head back to Koralt. Maybe they'll meet again. Zink voiced a hope that they'd be all right. Jinx hopped into the carriage, grinning as it rattled away. As he dove into his literature study, a stab of guilt burned in him. Even Dinkiro hadn't deserved such torment in his past life. Holed up in the aristocrat's mansion, he dove headfirst into relentless study. After the battle with the monsters, he returned to camp and plunged into study, pressed an enchanted item and a hospitality assessment card into the hands of the nobles who sheltered him, and studied and studied. At last the carriage jolted to a stop, an attendant ordered him out for a tour, and they stepped into Koralt. Zinc leapt from the carriage and froze, jaw dropping as the city's walls loomed, double the height of Rosalt's royal ramparts. He was speechless. Impatience crackled through him. He wanted to tear across the city's streets, but his guards snapped he couldn't go alone, and if anything happened to him, they'd all be dead. The head of the guard barked for him to hold his nerve until he passed the entrance exam, then snapped that they had to head to the mansion at once. At the Brando mansion, Jinku burst in to find the Count's wife Arya and their son Chris waiting. Chris grinned that his father had already talked about Jinku and announced he wanted to join the school within a month, and Jinku asked to be called simply Jink so he wouldn't feel uncomfortable. And Arya admitted she couldn't offer much hospitality but urged him to feel at home. Chris, defying his mother's protests, decided to show Mr. Jink every corner of their house. Even with every advantage Jinkiro's powers gave him, one fatal weakness stayed. He pushed himself past his endurance, and the moment he stumbled into the house he crumpled to his knees and blacked out. At Kal Royal Palace, the nobles burst in to tell His Majesty an enchanter had arrived, and that enchanter was seeking entry to Kal High School. Chris demanded I dig up everything on Jinka and haul him straight to the infirmary. Jink sprawled on the floor, eyes locked on his status as it pulsed. Maximum assessment. He'd reached the top, and the day of the Kal Kingdom High School Magic Department entrance exam had finally arrived. Jink caught wind that the school was a fortress to storm, and in Japan the same exam would be just a warm-up. He pushed his studies to the brink and collapsed in Count Brando's house. His magic surged despite his wrecked appearance, and Chris rushed in to nurse him back to health. Perched at his desk, Count Sun gaped as DZINK blitzed through the questions like they were nothing. The written part of the exam was finally over. Next up, the magic practice test. Applicants stood in two tight rows on the training field, urged to unleash every trick in their arsenal as teachers leaned in to judge each power's type and rarity. Then the announcer boomed, "Number 783, rank adventure, Mr. Zhang." The young men gawked here. Even applicants were called gentlemen. Candidates whispered non-stop when word spread that Jink had an S rank. Curiosity crackled in the air as he chose to unleash magic in his attack. Would they crown his enchantment or condemn it? Jin skidded to a halt before the examiner, Mr. Dusty Pennon, the Kalk Kingdom's marquis, a man whose status branded him a sage. He declared to Jinku he'd put his enchantment and magic evaluation skill to the test, and the marquis sprang to life, scanning Jink and laying bare his magic reserves and healing status. His water magic sputtered, clearly weaker than the others' healing signs. A cold humiliation settled in his chest under the examiner's gaze, and Panelma's voice cut the air as she asked him to demonstrate his abilities. They voted to kick things off with a water balloon. After the exam, they poured out of the school with Chris leading the pack. He launched the first splash. He beamed at the water magic show. Sure, the water cyclone looked insanely cool to him, and Jink shot back that the caster had sprayed everyone after pushing his enchantment skill too far. Are they going to strip him of points for this? Marquis Penham is top-tier nobility. He could storm into the king's chamber and spill the whole thing. He's an enchanter. Rosalta would discover that truth far sooner than he'd expected, sure enough. Fresh from the exam, Adam barreled into the royal palace, and the king asked him how it went. The marquis thundered that everything went flawlessly and shimmered with enchantment. This guy strikes with deadly swordsmanship and raw, bone-crushing strength, and it hides a massive storage space. King Cole answered the routine call, stroked his beard like a ruler plotting, and Panem kept feeding His Majesty steady updates on the guy's progress. She announced Jink had blitzed through 96% of the written exam. Not bad. Almost no one had ever pulled off results like that. The Marquis was certain this person would storm into the magic department's first class. One of the masters snapped, furious. How can he speak of this when he's still a child? The king roared that he felt the crowd's fears, yet he wondered how they'd judge all of humanity. Whispers had reached him that Dizing had tried to poison his father. If someone with that power turned villain, they'd erupt into a cataclysmic threat to the stake. Manam's voice cut through the court as he reassured the king, saying his assessment found Jinka no sinner and that his Sikjutsu skills were shockingly low for a non-land descendant. Their family's fame screamed from a single spear. Whispers claimed someone had framed the fallen man and banished him to Rosalt. The academicians split over the verdict, and many still swore Dzink remained an aristocrat and a man of power. They recoiled, others shrugged it off as unworthy of notice. Whispers ran wild. Was the man exiled for failing to wield a spear, or did Rosalta hide darker motives? The king barked. The answer was simple. In Rosalta, they cast him out oblivious to his power as an enchanter, and Normal Call has ordered a place to be prepared. His Majesty proclaimed their country a refuge for the Jinka enchanter, swearing they would never exploit his abilities for their own gain. A few days later, Jink's heart raced when he learned he'd passed. Only 3 people in total had made it into the first class. He whooped and slapped Chris on the back, congratulating him for making second grade. He'd done it after all. Chris exploded the news at Jink. His mother had heard they'd been invited to an audience from the king, and he shot a grin, demanding whether the young man even owned proper formal attire for it. He'd only ever seen him in plain clothes before. DeSink shot back that he was a fallen aristocrat who'd sold every possession to scrape together the money for his deportation. Money from the assessment card he'd crafted for the aristocrats lined his pockets, so he decided to storm the city for shopping. Chris cheered it on. The place housed applicants, doubled as a launch pad into the underground labyrinth and other schemes, even running as a slave factory to harvest human resources, and the young man was offered a spot in the top 10. Slave trading ran like clockwork in this world, but Jinku still recoiled. He needed someone B-level or higher. At last they found someone. Deasing jabbed a finger at 12-year-old Nina. The slaver declared he'd sell her as a salt woman, but as they drove her. A pack of dogs lunges and tears into her. He sells her like a common slave, slapping a price on her, 1 gold coin and 3 silver coins. DZINK nodded, sealing the deal. The sale went through, and he pressed a lone drop of his own blood onto the girl's neck. The sale slammed shut, and the owner declared he was handing the girl over for the Dzinku's use. She crashed to her knees and swore that from today on she was her master's slave, his to use however he wanted. Jink beckoned her to follow. He marched her into Count Brando's house, planted her in a chair, and demanded she tell him where she came from. Nina sprang from a poor farmer's family. When winter gnawed through their last coins, they sold her off as one more mouth to feed. Jink dismissed it as a familiar tale, but his parents wrestled with the choice like it would tear them apart. She spat that the new dad said she'd been abandoned, and the young man's jaw clenched. He was done asking questions. Turns out her father had discarded her too. The niece spun toward her and spat 5 orders: obey him always. Don't strike him, don't lie to him, don't spill his secrets or launch anything aimed at him. Keep every rule, and she might earn her freedom. Even though she's a slave, she must burn into her mind that he doesn't intend to use her for evil. He'll punish her for rudeness or any mistake. He leaned in and asked if she had any questions for him. The girl shot back that she had one question. Scarred and defiant, she insisted on taking night shifts. Jink exploded, furious, demanding if she even knew what kind of night work that was, and Nina said she had heard about it. Link cut her off, snapping that wasn't why he'd bought her, and she shot back that it's the only way she can help. She can't do physical work and she can't read or write. They hammered it into her. This is your destiny. This is what you were born for. Jingle. He thrust a potion into the girl's hand, vowed he'd heal her wound first, and warned that no ordinary potion could cure it. Nina asked, "Can they really hand that to slaves?" Jink barked, ordering her to drink it. She deserves it. He declared he could size people up at a glance and had picked her for one reason: her cooking chops. Her other skills were weak, but there. They can be improved, Jink said, pressing his hand to the girl's shoulder. I have a request. I need your strength. Once the wound heals, take a bath. He rolled up his sleeves to craft her new clothes. Nina gasped and asked if she could help, and DZNC's grin said it all. That's exactly what he'd had in mind. Tears streaked her cheeks as the slave complied with his command, and Chris overflowed with gratitude to Jinku for bringing Nina to the house. She cooked like a storm, her hands a blur that left even their headmaid gaping. They devoured every bite with pure pleasure as Jink transmuted unwanted items into gleaming bullion and pocketed the money. He'd burned through a mountain of mana potions. Chris demanded why he needed so much money, and Dzink coldly replied he'd need more slaves. Chris pressed him to explain more from this point on, and right then Nina proclaimed she'd made cookies. She dared the youngsters to try it, and DZINK eagerly took the entire jar of mouth-watering cookies from her hands. She pressed him to tell her their impressions later, and as Nina slipped away, Chris's gaze snagged on the maid uniform she wore. Jink slammed the question at Chris. Do you know where to buy Daddle's slaves? The factory where Chris had bought Nina had none, but Chris grinned and said they could be found. Inside those so-called prisoner sale agencies, criminal slaves are corralled. The high school dorms swallowed Jink whole, but when he pictured Nina beside him, those cavernous rooms shrank into something warm and perfectly comfortable. He was haunted. He still needed battle slaves, plus a long list of other essentials, and every single one demanded cold, hard money. Chris whirled to Jinku and blurted that classes start today. They're in different classes, and he might skip a few. All the credits landed on him. DZINK told Chris skipping class those first days would stick out, and when he walked into the room, everyone devoured him, the girls especially, hearing he was an S-rank venture and struck by his looks, whispering if he already had a fiancée. Many classmates treated him like he was out of their leg, while others nursed secret fantasies of becoming his mistress. The school roared like he'd never left Rosealt, and he bristled. They didn't care about him, only his status. His engagement gives him nothing, it only fattens their coffers, they're clearly from low stock. That's it. Their future hangs by a thread, desperation claws at them. If they want money, send them out to slay monsters for coin, because magic doesn't care whether you're a man or a woman. Countless jobs already welcome women, so why don't they blaze their own trail to the summit instead of clinging to someone else's wallet? Jink met Najenda call. She was a freshman too, her surname revealed she was Princess Najenda, and when she asked Jinka to treat her like a classmate, he shot back that he was an adventurer now. This was the first year of their adventure, and he might not see her often. She shot back that she was out on her father's business. With the domain spanning an entire country, royal duties were a relentless, tangled burden. D. Zink's eyes locked on students shoving cash into a certain gentleman's hand as they loudly called him Mr. Blogg. He was a hulking brute who barked that every student must pay for his friendship, and fury flared when their offering proved insultingly small. A student blurted that this month had nearly wrecked him, then the Blogg grabbed him by the collar and snarled, "You really want to know what'll happen if he refuses to be friends? He wants a friend from the Duke's family, doesn't he?" Jink jabbed Agenda, "Who's that fat guy?" And the girl shot back that he's the heir of the Randozel family. Back in middle school, he swaggered like the rules didn't apply. His antics got many classmates expelled. He's in the 3rd grade. Jink gaped and demanded how he'd even slipped into high school back then. Najenda shot back that his father had pulled every string he could, but there was no proof, and not even the royals could lift a finger. The blogger slid up to the princess and offered a polite greeting. She turned to the fat man and asked what just happened. The blogger let out a nasty giggle and replied that he'd only been chatting with a friend. He asked the princess for permission to speak to the young man at her side, then fixed Jinka with a hard gaze and challenged him, "Were you truly fit for such lofty status?" The man said he'd hire him and squeeze every drop from his S rank. After all, as a commoner he could use the Randozel family name, words that made Jinka's blood boil. The blogger snapped, "Are you even listening?" The young man shouted at the insolent man to keep his hands off him, and the blogger hissed that he'd make him regret hitting him. He shot his fists out, snarling that Jink had started it, and bragged he was an expert in hand-to-hand combat. One sharp jab to the jaw shut the renowned family's representative up. The fat man folded and hit the floor. He swiped blood from his nose as Jink snapped, "Didn't you read the school rules? Here it doesn't matter who you are or what family you're from. What class are you from, noble or commoner, 1st grade or 3rd? None of that matters. Nobody dares lay a hand on you. He's not in his middle school." He snapped open his agenda and shoved an offer to leave this place, while the girl begged Jinku, one look and she'd be terrified. The young man snapped that it wasn't very beautiful. The princess soothed him, urging him not to worry, then turned to Jinka and asked if he'd received an invitation from her father. "It's not necessary," she smiled, "but she'd love for him to come to the palace." The young man snapped that the honor was real, but he had no official suit and couldn't buy one because he was scrimping elsewhere. Najenda laughed and branded him an adventurer, a perfectly normal, deasing thinker. A few days later, King Namal Cole himself strode forward, welcomed Jinka into the palace, and boomed his thanks for coming to the official reception. Dazing beamed, calling it a true honor. The king smirked, saying he'd heard rumors nobles often asked him to make them an appraisal card. He braced for a brutal challenge. The young man shot back that he wasn't. For that defiant answer, he pockets rewards. The king commanded him to unleash enchantments and perform evaluations. Jink pledged to his majesty that if anything lay within his power, he'd do it. He leapt at the chance. The young man resolved to channel his disappointment into a driving force for his official work. It slammed into him. His daughter had told him there'd been an incident with a child from the Randozel family. Does he blame his own sloppiness? Deasing shot back that he knew someone just like this blogger, a guy who flaunted his strength by preying on the weak, and nobody liked him. Rage coiled in him. He couldn't forgive that man, yet he'd braced to accept any punishment. The king waved it off, saying he only wanted to check that he and Najenda didn't care about the man, and he suspected the man's enchantments weren't meant to harm. He leaned in and asked the young man if he could give him something exciting for doing so well in school. "What do you want?" The young man shot back that he wanted the right to buy slaves from the agency that sells prisoners as slaves. The king gaped at the request. Desink said he buys them to plumb Hamel's underground labyrinth and broaden his reach by attracting talented people. Normal grasped the young man's ambition, but why would he want slaves? He snapped that hiring ordinary adventurers and servants would throw open the door for Rosalt's spies. He only hires to protect his own skin. The king recognized Jink's deep wisdom, saw he wasn't the villain everyone claimed, and moved to befriend him. Soon Dizianke seized his chance and stepped into an agency that peddled prisoner slaves. The authorities greenlit their entry, and he and Nina were allowed inside. Dzink's eyes glittered. He hoped to score many good slaves here. He turned to the girl and told her she didn't have to come, but even though this was not a good place, she objected, insisting it would be an important experience. Many prisoners hurled themselves at the cage bars to terrify the visitors, and Nina asked Jinka if he wasn't afraid. She's no stranger to this. Instead of answering, he hurls the question at her. Do you like anyone here? And today she chooses. Nina shot back that she'd be fine with any of them. Dink groaned, admitting he was still sick of them. The young man locked eyes on a lone slave, battle-ready and teetering on the edge of hitting its ceiling. His name was Jan. Zink spun to the warden and demanded to speak to the prisoner, then snapped at Jan, asking what he'd done to be accused of murder, and the slave shot back that he was the son of a rich merchant who'd clashed with his parents' second wife. She decided to get rid of him. A knife-wielding attacker lunged into the clash, and Dzink insisted he acted in self-defense. Nina's jaw dropped. The slave's price was a staggering 53 platinum coins. It clocked in at 52 billion yen. Dazing's mind spun as he ran that number over and over. It's already stacked with great stats, and buying it will supercharge them. So how many assessment cards must he crank out? You'll need a ton of space and heavy-duty equipment. The boss stared at Jinka, disbelief cracking his voice. Is he really going to buy it, even though it was an accident? He's still branded a murderer. Nobles and merchants shun it, and Young said his father even tried to buy it back. For relatives, the price rockets tenfold, turning the whole thing into a near impossible wall. Not even his father's fortune can buy a way through. Guilt swallowed him. He'd never be able to meet his family's eyes. Nina assured Jinku the man wasn't scary at all. Jink slammed his decision into place. He'd buy Ian. Free from prison at last, he strode up to His Majesty and asked him to grant a mansion. Chris burst into laughter, shouting he finally knew what he'd been waiting for, while my mother stood talking with the royal family. Link shot a question. Was the Brando family's land on the line? Chris admitted his nerves had twisted his stomach into knots and said he'd been swamped with requests to draft a rating map. Dzink thanked him for jumping into the work, and Chris revealed Nina is learning to read and write while sharpening her cooking. Now she can cook orc meat. Deny it's an orc and the flavor turns shockingly pleasant. Ian plunged into wind magic and swordplay, and his stats surged. Jink pressed a rare Amato Kingdom sword into his hands, nearly impossible to find, and every so often he caught Ian staring off, thoughts tangled behind his eyes. Ian insisted there was nothing to worry about, but Jink vowed he'd corner him for a talk when they went shopping. He seized Ian's arm and shouted for him to come to the city with him as they thundered down the street together. Swathed in a black cloak, he crouched around the corner, eyes locked on them, desperate to stay unseen. Jink slammed the potion and antidote box into Ian's hands, urged him to tally every weapon and piece of equipment, and as he'd said before, warned him to speak up if he had any questions. Ask them without hesitation. Any pause will doom the party and leave them lost. Out of nowhere, the man who'd been watching from the building's corner stepped into his path, spear gleaming in his grip, and barked, "Don't you dare use your brother as a pawn." He barked they'd free him this instant. Jink's breath hitched as he realized this was Ian's younger brother. His status flashed his name, Ash. He was a level 10 unemployed person, but his sword skill was razor-sharp. Dzink's chest tightened with sorrow. Ian's abandoned brother stepped forward, locked eyes with Ash, and hissed, "Do you really want to detain the S-rank royal adventurer?" He refused to recommend that stunt. Ian's brother shot back, telling him to stop showing off, and he swore he'd defeat him and drag his brother back. Jinjin declared him the official owner for 53 platinum coins, and he seethed that Ash was exactly his age. He didn't even realize it. Jan spun to Jinku and begged me for forgiveness, calling himself a fool. He asked to be punished, but pleaded that no one touch his brother. Nash roared at him to stop talking, fury flaring at the sight of him bowing at that man's feet. He hated it, and Jink flinched, realizing he looked like the villain. He stormed up to Ash and demanded, "Do you hate me for killing your mother and your mother-in-law?" The younger brother snarled that what he hated most was being turned into a slave. He insisted he was smarter and better than him, and he wanted to punch him. He craves a brother like that back at his side. Ash told his brother their father had been desperate to find the money and pull it out, but the man had bought it earlier. Jink snarled at Ash that nothing he could do would change a thing, every move pointless. Soon he'd be forced to become his opponent. Is that what he wants? Ash threw down a fearless challenge, daring Jinku to strike. The young man obeyed, lunging with lightning speed. A savage strike hacked Nesh's spear into a spray of tiny shards. Ian's younger brother stood there empty-handed. Jink locked onto the discouraged youth and snapped, "You still want to fight me or not?" just as the guards sprinted in and seized Ash, binding him fast. Accused of attacking Jink, he was about to be held until a young man barked for his release. announced they were from the Adventurers Guild and that he'd personally take the prisoner there. They apologized, said they'd just received word from the guild and urged him to go, but Jink brushed it off, said he needed to take his purchases home, told Jan to return without him, and promised they'd talk it over at home. Jink crashed through the door to a breathless Nina, shouting that Jan was about to die. He sprinted straight for Ian's room. He saw the man raise a dagger to kill himself. A young man lunged, grabbing his arm with a weapon in hand. He demanded they let him die, roaring that saving him would disrespect his relative. Jink rushed in, trying to calm him. What terrified him most was the thought of wasting 50 million yen. After Jin ripped the weapon from Ian's hand, the slave turned to the master and begged to be punished, insisting he deserved it. The young man snarled that they were going to the maze tomorrow, and he'd have to blaze through its twisting corridors and saddle up to ride with the horses. He snapped at him to stop belittling the situation. Jinx shot back that it was better than dying. He commanded Ian to stay motionless until he gave the word. He swore he'd push himself to the limit. Nina lashed out at Jinka, "Are you going to let Ian die?" And the young man calmed her. It's fine, he'd already forgiven Ian. Jan demanded to know Ash's fate, and Jinx snapped that Ash had been locked in the guild's detention cell to reflect on his behavior, then told Jan not to worry, no one would execute him. Jan confessed that, as a child, his mother-in-law beat him, leaving him battered and dependent on others' care. He had a brother and loved him fiercely. The slave pressed Mr. Jinka, asking if he had a brother too. The young man answered that his brother's name was Esther, though Esther didn't act like that. Dzink's chest ached with longing for Esther. How could he possibly live there? At the non-land's house in that instant, Esther perched beside Elsa. He stroked her hand to soothe her, insisting her brother was probably fine. Esther knew it, and Elsa's nanny did too. She loved Brother Dzink like a son, but now he stood powerless. The butler delivered her father's command that he must not step outside without permission and swore he'd bring him dinner soon. My father wasn't home, so there should be no trouble. The butler then asked Hester if he was still thinking about that fallen man. He told me to wipe that sinner from my mind. Esther jabbed the old man. Have you nothing to do? No one to assert yourself with? The butler urged Dzink to stow his belongings and snap stilettos onto his shoes. Master spat idiot and stormed to his room. He thought ruefully that the whole city was whispering that Jinka had become a fallen non-land. Jink the brother tore into every grueling training dawn without fail, hungry for the heir's mantle of the famed spearman. He idolized him. Because he pushed on through everything, he wielded the spear like an extension of himself, every motion precise, every strike proving how skilled he was. Relentless training forged him into a weapon, and he felled his brother in a duel. It began as a game, and his grandfather demanded he train harder with the spear, but nothing changed. My brother admitted his actions were incredibly brave, and he can barely hold back. He grills him about his progress and every move he's made. Jink kept coming to him for advice, which must have seared his pride, yet his brother always had his back and treated him just the same. That day everything cracked wide open. Grandpa began favoring him, and Jinku suddenly bore the sharp sting of harsher treatment. He was the one who branded him fallen, ruined my brother's name, and sent him off in an unknown direction. Esther blamed himself too. He stole my brother's whole life. But It's been days since grandfather and father were summoned to the royal palace. I'm dying to know what they're whispering behind those closed doors. At the Roselt royal palace, a heated exchange burst to life as envoys of the non-manned family were pressed hard. How will you shoulder this responsibility? The Majesty pinned Nobel Non-Land, the former head of the House of Non-Land, with a piercing question. They banished the enchanter for one sharp reason, and that choice proved a grave mistake. He bolts into the kingdom of Kal, a land completely unconnected to Roselt, and dragging him back will be a titanic, nearly impossible battle. Rage boiled through the crown prince of the kingdom of Roselt Elliot as he snapped, how long can this last? Nobel shot back that they had to fix this together. Members of the royal family had a hand in the Jinka's expulsion. They had to shoulder this too. Prince Evil snapped that goblins and kobolds would devour him in an instant. He barely made it to the stake. The man darted like a cockroach, and mercifully that cockroach turned out to be an enchanter after all. Her father can become an enchanter too. The king snapped an order for Elliot to stop it, and it's shockingly simple. Zinka's veins surge with her father's blood. That very blood lets him and his father awaken as enchanters. The mystery unravels, the king reels, horror washing over him. He snapped at his son, demanding why he'd told him that. The heir could only murmur a single, clipped apology. He hurls the truth at his father. He'd secretly overheard the conversation with the nobleman, and the heir itself explodes, crowning him a ray of salvation. He snaps an order for the finest sage and sorcerer to be brought before him. The young man explodes to his feet, shouting, his heart blazing at the thought that he and his father are about to learn how to become enchanters. The nobles at the table froze, shock etched into every face as the scene unfolded. One of the people sitting there rockets to his feet, horror carving across his face, and snarls, "What does this mean?" He defied the banishment of the Jinka. Now it's revealed he's the king's secret son. Clutching his head, the man groans it all happened because of their position, and the young Randozal heir stands in stunned incomprehension. It was only a matter of time. The hidden sins of the royal family and the non-land family have been ripped into the light. Esther reads the book, but her focus shatters as one burning question claws at her. Have rank adventurers already descended on this world? He throws out that maybe they're here for his father or grandfather, then the reply slams down. The Sacred Flame group wants him, and the young man snaps, "I'll be right there." A dark-haired man from the Sacred Flame Stackimer strode in as the living emblem of every adventure that stake spawned. Merce Karen, the blonde member of Dragon's Tears, cried that Esther looks every bit like a girl. Then the man with the trunk stepped forward, introduced himself as Alec Thunder, and announced he'd come to deliver something from Diesel. Relief creeps in, but Esther's face crumples. She's utterly lost, while the dark-haired man snarls that the Stake Guild should have passed it along. He drops the bomb. DZINK's alive and safe, living in Coralta. Tears well in Esther's eyes as he staggers at the truth, his mind fixated on his body. My brother's fine. He's itching to bring these people over and introduce them to someone else. Curious about her brother, Mrs. Karen beams and agrees. They all hurry to Elsa, who bursts with joy at news of Jinka, and Mr. is asked to tell us more. He nods eagerly and dives into the story. The man rips the veil off the secret. Jinky is the son of the foreign Shanders in the world, the guy. He wields evaluation and alchemy like twin blades, and Esther finally sees why DZINK asked for his blood. Elsa snaps that she never knew, even after standing by him for so long. Esther rushes to soothe her, insisting she not blame herself. She didn't know either. Mr. confesses he tried to hide it, swearing it was the right decision. Elsa snapped, if they ever find out about this, they'll rip away his freedom in this country. Mr. Will shrugs, voice flat as a board. I haven't heard any good rumors about Rosalta, totally unexcited. He drops a bomb. He even knows about the poisoning in the Chancellor's family, and Esther and Elsa erupt, eyes blazing with excitement. The king compelled the Chancellor's daughter to bear a Jinka, and the room froze, every face nailed in stunned disbelief. The blonde girl lashes out like a whip, roaring that this is not the time to talk, especially not with Esther here, and the terrified man chokes out a trembling apology. Truth slams into Esther. She and Jink aren't siblings, and Elsa grabs the boy's shoulders, pleading with him not to let go of his childhood. He snaps, everything's fine, keep going. Vows to lay the whole story bare, the reigning king. King Rosalta seized the throne with the Chancellor's backing, and together they hid a dark, dangerous secret. Seething at the state of affairs, the king summoned the Chancellor's daughter to join him for brazen fun, obviously his wife. They nearly uncovered the plot, but they erased every trace linking the Chancellor's daughter to it. Carrying Dizink's child, she married Gordon of the non-man family. The nobleman erupted in fury, refusing to let a grandson with no drop of his blood inherit. On the day of the Chancellor's family party, a scheming aristocrat laced both the wine and the food with poison. Jink was supposed to be there, but brutal training pinned him down. Poison claimed Elsa's husband and son alongside the girl. Ventures snarled it was a terrible, unforgivable story. Elsa said the aristocrat in Gordon had warned her that if anyone found out the story, it would be the end of. Elsa snarled through tears, bitterness coiling in her voice. She couldn't even stop Mr. Jane's expulsion. Esther tried to soothe Elsa, whispering that it wasn't her fault. His mind churned with nothing but the whole tangled mess with Jink. Mr. Will swears only the two of them knew, and reports the capital has begun openly denouncing the royal power. Karen snaps that DZNK was kicked out for a reason. We rip the curtain open. Every smallerist craft won't refuse cash and will trade secrets in a heartbeat. Elsa snaps that she even knows the aristocrat's hemorrhoids have worsened. Esther slaps a hand over her face, and the dragon bares its teeth. A New Year's contestant bellows he's returning to the call, warning this country is a sinking ship, Mr. Nature demands Esther's verdict. He snaps that nothing good is left in this country. He rockets to his feet and begs Lady Karen to make him her slave. The girl freezes, delight flaring across her face, and Esther explains her offer, saying he will be in the. He's doomed to slavery no matter what. He burns to become her slave, and Mistress Karen will hand Esther over to his brother. Suddenly Elsa surrenders herself to slavery. She has nowhere left to go. Rumors swarm around the man in the black suit who works for the family over here. He's the one everyone's talking about. He can feel it. This house is finished too. Mrs. Karen leans toward Esther, voice ice cold as she asks if he'll obey every order, and the young man snaps back a thrilled yes. Gasps exploded as Mrs. Karen slipped a maid's uniform onto Esther, turning her into a servant right before everyone's eyes. She snaps that he's no longer the heir to that high-ranking aristocratic house. Take off the disguise and his face will give him away, and Esther stands confused. Someone snorts that women's clothes are too flashy. Elsa bursts into laughter and floods the young man with praise for his new look. Together, they vaulted into the guild's famed hippo-vulture carriage and dared to go without. We brought Lady Karen Esteman down, and she's still clawing her way back to health. Esther insists he call his brother Mr. Ding Ding. They're no longer brothers. Isn't it wild that Hamel proudly wears the name City of Adventures? A blonde girl, her name blazes onto the screen, jabs a finger at something, yanking Mr. Jink's gaze straight to it. She jabbed a finger at the maze. Jink and Jansaw Dizink declared the maze too demanding. It loomed massive. Aya eyed the weathered building and said he'd heard adventurers use it as a monster hunting ground, so it felt like a tiny town, relatively safe but crawling with unpleasant people. Jink proclaimed he knew a lot, and Ian, the blonde, shot back that there was something similar stood in his parents' house. His father sometimes brought him along on outings. The competition teamed with average adventurers from various clans. She piped up, "What's a clan?" And they answered, "A clan's a force of adventurers, several smaller groups united into one." They could band together and join a clan. Hamel teamed with powerful figures who hid behind clans for protection. Ian warned people were sometimes scarier than monsters. The frightened girl begged they never run into those kinds, and the guys headed to the guild to dig up more information. The building that houses Open Eat Adventure dwarfs the guild in Coralta, a hulking behemoth that dominates the skyline. They stepped inside and found a scene ripped from a shopping mall cafeteria. They moved in on a unit. They cornered the well-informed girl who worked there, proclaimed they were adventurers and demanded a reservation. Then something crashed in and cut them off. A towering, swaying man lurches up to them, taunting them and snarling they should find an escort or join a clan. The working girl spits out Philip and snaps that she isn't talking to him. The guy stammers an apology, admitting he was a little drunk. Jink waves it off, says it's fine, and presses his guild card into the girl's hand. She goes stiff, nerves sparking under her skin. During the service, the crowd erupted. People around burst into stunned shouts the moment they realized he's ranked. Jink said. They scoff that his skills aren't really that high, and an employee, stuttering with panic, pleads to sprint to the floor, shouting she must immediately inform them that the enchanter has arrived. Gasps erupted when the guys were whisked straight up to the 5th floor, a rare treatment for people like them. Jan, Jink, and Nina sank into the room, and Nina, clearly smitten with the soft sofa, had already flopped onto it. Mona, stunning, burst into the room and announced she was their manager, telling them to contact her anytime with questions, while Mr. D and Gunder stood there, stunned that everyone envied them. The manager launched into the maze's features. Its killer twist was a ceaseless tide of monsters, and corpses clawed their way back to life after a while. When they die, you might snatch a magic stone or harvest a priceless body part. She warns the deeper they push, the fiercer the monsters become, and no one knows why. The maze's end slammed into view. Inside, the air might not match the surface at all. There she was, the girl, right there. Fortify your clothes with insulation, lace up tough shoes, and stockpile extra outfits. Mona shoved me toward the guild shop. She's got a request burning to hand to Mr. Jink. The guild sent out a desperate request to collect magic stones. Jinx warns the Coal Kingdom is running dangerously low right now, and many adventurers don't even bother gathering them. In this world, magic stones function like batteries. Activate one, and it explodes into flame or gushes out fresh water. The lifeblood that fuels everyday life. The guys swarm the slime fields, pouncing on gooey blobs that often cough up magic stones. Dezink barked at his friends that this was a real fight, then echoed Spell's warning like a battle cry. He refused to touch it. Everything will hinge on them. Suddenly, as the slime erupts into view, everyone snaps weapons to hand. Dezing bellows he'll patch them up if he can, but the top priority is tearing the slime apart, ordering Ian to pair sword strikes with wind magic and urging Nina to calm down, steady her breath, and remember her training. Nina plunges into a daze, the only shield keeping the slime from swallowing her. He barks at her to move, insisting it'll make her adapt faster. She nods, voice shaking and eyes wide with nerves. Ian lunges, his sword screaming as it cleaves through the line. The guys are tearing into each other, then DZINK swoops in, lifts their spirits and showers them with blazing praise. Nina's jaw dropped as the slime dissolved into nothing. He felt the enchantment erase his exhaustion, and every time he killed a slime his body flared with a pale, electric glow. Jink bellows to the guys that slaying the slime nets them experience points, and he also. They realize progress isn't the same as in the mansion. Now levels are earned in the brutal heat of real fights, not in staged drills. Happy Nina says she froze with fear at first, then her movements snapped into sharp, fluid precision. Now she's gunning to level up. Dzink whirls to his friends, shouting this is their shot at leveling up or clearing the maze. Ian studies the map, spots a slug room on the third floor, off limits to anyone under B rank. Only B rank mages can enter, and warns a swarm of monsters can spawn there, trapping everyone until a set time passes or every creature is slain. Jink brandishes a potion vial and vows it will patch every wound. Jink snapped at Ian and Nina, watch your safety and don't overdo it, pile up all those enchanted items and you'll rocket straight to rank. The guys burst into the room and froze, it was empty, and they had no idea where everyone else had gone. The slime explodes into view and the guy rockets into battle as Nina yells she can move faster, and Ajink's eyes snap open. There are far more monsters than he'd expected. The guy pulled off something extraordinary. He conjured a roaring water cyclone. Dzink. One hit exposed the maze's rising complexity. It wasn't so simple. Jink warns the water cyclone devours mana. He tells them to scramble for magic stones and jelly slime. The guys are. Nina spins to Jinku, guilt carved across her face as she murmurs an apology. It's too soon for her to fight, and he just waves it off, telling her not to worry. He spots the two naive and announces Ian and Nina just gained experience. Their levels are almost equal, Ian at 56, Nina at 50. Ian's face strained as he snapped that it'd be smarter to just collect stones now. Jink, Josette, plotted to tell the guild to fix their stats. The dazing thoughts zeroed in on the slime, tearing it apart with every ounce of strength and ignoring everything else. Nina surged forward, claiming the shield mastery skill. They didn't just slaughter the slugs, they stacked up a huge bank of experience points. Dzink grins, these levels let us dive deeper, while Ian, eyes glued to the map, calls out a room littered with goblins on the floor. Fifth floor, Nina confesses, voice trembling, she's terrified to face them. They often raid her village and their stings burn. The guys refuse to go there. Ian throws you a choice, the 9th floor swarming with kobolds or the 15th crawling with orcs, and they opt to hunt the kobolds. Their drops will fetch a fortune, so they've got to arm up to take on the orcs. Nina whoops that they've got to camp and hunt monsters, and the guys feel like true adventurers. The friends burst onto the 9th floor into a room swarming with kobolds, a magic circle pressed against the wall. Dzink snapped that it was set so the kobolds can only be attacked from one side, ordered Nina to stick behind Ian while he and Ian strike with sword and spell, and Jink swore he'd take Ian's place the moment he tired. An attack erupts and the guys sprint straight at the evil kobolds. Ian unleashed an aerial arrow that tore Kobold's arm clean from his shoulder and hurled him backward. A hulking creature launches itself at Nina, sword swinging, then a razor-quick parry deflects the blow. Shield raised, Nina seizes the moment, flips the fight in her favor, and takes Cole down. Dzink summons his friends to his side. He roared he'd summon a crashing wall of water, and the guys snapped to it, obeying his orders. Dzink scans the chaos, weighs every angle, and pronounces the kobolds won't break through. He slams his palm down, calls a halt, and demands they take a break to pack away the magic stones and cobalt knives. Left out, they'll jeopardize the fight. Nina nearly face-planted over it. Dzink snaps that it has to be fixed. First, you have to handle the kobolds. He realizes the water wall is about to vanish. The second round erupts. Ian hatches a plan to speed it up by blasting it with magic Nina can't use, and if Jink and Chansar do their part, the whole thing will look terrifyingly real. Nina, eyes sparkling, bursts out that she wants to use magic too. Mr. Jink warns she barely has any mana, and Ian pushes to give her a potion to boost it because it's worth it. Inspired, Nina shouts that she agrees. Dzink congratulates the girl on being a temporary sorceress now. Evil kobolds lunged at the adventurers, fangs bared. The party slammed the attack back and held the line. Nina hurled a water balloon like a lifeline to help. Jinx calls for a breather and urges everyone to pack up. Nina, suddenly upset, spins to him and blurts she needs the bathroom. He instantly realizes she drank too much at the party. Dzn thrust a small, sealed box into Nene's hands. She blinked, baffled, and asked what it was. He smiled, said he'd enchanted it for her to use as she needed, and vowed that he and Ian would turn away and not look. Ian needs the bathroom too. Mina tears off to relieve herself. Panic claws at her, terrified they'll spot her. She snaps at the guys, warning she'll offend them. On the third day, the 15th floor erupted into a brutal clash with orcs. Nina's jaw drops at the fallen orc as she cries they actually beat him, and Dzink grits his teeth, growling they still struggle against the orcs and need to get stronger. Ian hails Mr. Jinku as the only reason they're unharmed, and now they clutch orc meat. Nina's burning to cook it, the guys leveled up. This place forged them into real adventures. 3 days later, they swear they'll come back after conquering this room. The guys are. Just outside the boss's room, Jink barks orders to bring down the orc general. Nina slips behind to cover their rear while Ian blasts the enemy with crackling magic. They burst into the room and lock eyes with a towering, nightmarish creature, and the guys surge forward, launching a fearless, full-on attack. Desink rockets ahead of the group and lunges at the orc, but the brute slams him backward. Ian barrels in and fells the orc. The orc lies slain, silence swallows its roar. Nina explodes with joy, shouting they've slain the orc, then she spots her. He whirls around, eyes snagging a soft piece, and asks, "What is it?" Jan Whisper lines in and hisses into Jinku's ear. It's an orc's egg. Nina lunges to touch it. Jink devours Nina's signature. That's what orcs do. Mina thrusts the plate into Ian's palms and warns him the orc egg is painfully rare. A guy barreled over to the group and blurted, "An unexpected meeting has taken place." Mr. Dink snapped, "Who are you?" The man who'd appeared scoffed at the rudeness, declared himself an adventurer, a master of the Big Tree clan named Luca, and grinned that he was glad to meet the end. Chanter Jink's eyes snapped. This guy was strength too, and he wondered if having an ability alone could blast him into the ranked chest as he kept replaying just how good Luca is. Jans growled that the Big Tree stands as Hamel's third largest clan. DZINK snapped, "What does Luca want from us?" Suddenly, desperate pleas for food explode through the room. Luca says he came back up from the lower floors to eat, but a monster ambushed them and left the guy stuck. The guy confesses he's ashamed, but admits he won't reach the surface hungry, so squirming, he offers to pay, and Deezing accepts. He waves off any payment and urges me to tell you about the clan. Luca nods kindly and pours out every scrap of knowledge he has. Jink asks Nina to cook more orc meat and ropes Yana in to help. They spring into action, and soon the sizzling plates of meat are ready. Hungry people swarm the food, worshipping Nina. She beams and promises to give you money. More satisfied, Lucas snarls that in the maze he survived on nothing but dried meat and bread, and now he's about to unleash the brutal truth about the climate. Listen, Hamel is ruled by two titans, Beyond Purgatory and the Messenger. Alongside the smaller Big Tree, they make up the three main clans, and the two giants enforce rigid hierarchies while warring for control. Low-ranked contestants get thrown into the maze, and anyone who can't cough up the entry fee just walks away. Dare call yourself an adventurer, and the Hamel clans brand you a traitor and slam their gates shut against you. Nina's brow tightens. Was this a matter of principle? Luca snaps that these are the unspoken words. Iron rules clamp down on the city, and anyone who refuses them joins the Big Tree. Luca takes in the Banished from both clans, two banners, different names, the same brutal reality. The story over, both sides exchanged sharp thanks, one for the food, the other for the information, and DZ&K stepped forward, offering to escort Luca to the exit. They were about to bolt too, now they're bursting out. Jink gulps down the sunlight, relishing every warm ray he hasn't felt in so long. Luca and Daising part with a terse goodbye. Luca's voice drops to a razor. Both clans have Jinku in their sights, so he must watch his back. Mr. Jink lanes in and asks Jan and Nina about their first trip through the maze. Nina grins that it was a total blast, and Ian says it's incredibly effective. He asks Mr. Jink to organize his own clan, skeptical it'll work, but willing to try. The next day in the Adventure Guild's backyard, DZINK hauled in a mountain of magic stones, and Mona's voice trembled as she stammered that it was way too many, counting every single one would take forever. Her eyes snap to the orc egg she brought, and she beams a fierce, grateful thank you at Jinka. He snapped, "What do you take me for?" She gasped, stunned that most adventurers sell it straight to merchants. The orc egg's fetching a king's ransom. DZINK, who swore he preferred meat, gapes. A scarred man storms in, growling that the young girl mustn't keep eggs. He was the one who named him first, then he jabbed the question at Jinka, "Is he a baby?" He proclaims he's the guild's head and smirks. Beating a boss dungeon in 3 days is impressive. The man booms that Jinx has blasted through the requirements for the B-rank exam. He vows he'll be the enchantress's opponent. Dan snaps that you must withstand his attacks for a set stretch of time. Zink's memory snaps into place. He'll say the same thing. The guy confesses to Mona he's not sure he can handle it, and the girl shoots back that even if he fails, there will be no problems. Dan sneered that class or rank meant nothing to him. DZNC reports he didn't so much as register it. He snapped, incredulous, that often young hotshots with massive power just have to show off. Jink roars, "I won't hold back," and you can't blame him. Mona bellows that the exam begins now, and Dzink snaps at the girl about the magic stones. She just smirks and says they'll find a use for them. He storms into the Hamel Branch arena, draped in urislits, a flashing necklace, a handful of rings clinking on his fingers, an enchanted cloak whipping behind him, and more hidden gear. Jink realizes his strength is so overpowering that any stamina test becomes pointless. Dan declares to Jinku he can fight with defense magic or a sword, then they launch into the clash. The exhausted man rasps that he'd heard Jink vanquished Snow. The truth hits him. He confesses the young man drained him utterly, and Jink goes rigid as realization dawns. He'd been aiming at the wrong spots and slammed straight into the blade, Dan tells. Gasping, he berated himself for not hurrying. The swords, misaligned, clashed at a single point. DZNK landed a few clean strikes, pure defense, not a violation of the rules. Disgruntled, Dan reports he lost, and the guy passed the exam for. Rank B, the man mocks Jink, sneering that he's about to cry. She snaps, "Go back, we need to talk." Bleary-eyed and drained, they howl in protest. They'd been promised a safe, profitable job. They erupt, furious and blaming whoever dreamed up collecting these magic stones. Mr. D's Inc. gets a round of applause for earning a B, and Mona snaps the exact total of cabled stones and knives they'd collected to him. Mona, perched opposite Jinku with Dan beside her, warns that this rank is only temporary so they can't escort him along the safe roads, and Dan snaps that D's Inc. stopped meeting an escort after he crushed Snow from the cold. Dink snaps me awake. Dan wanted to talk, he says. The man blinks and presses. What does the young man think about the supply contracts? And Dink admits he hasn't even thought about them. Dan's mind snaps to Ian's abandoned brother. He crashed into the guild after a savage fight. They let him go, but his father said they could. He could have kept the child, Dan, his father's merchant who works with the guild. A suggestion explodes that Jinx should negotiate with his father in exchange for an apology. Jinku balks, working with merchants would slash the guild's profits, and Dan warns him that if he finds out about the guy, someone will zero in on him. The world swarms with crooked merchants. He insists the guild must seal a deal with a reliable trader and warns not to pin hope on the boy's father. His eldest is a slave, and nobody knows what fate awaits the second. And the son, Dan's convinced they want us to meet him. Dink hesitates for a beat, then nods. He agrees to the meeting. The man barked, "D Zink be at this office in 2 hours." Walking down the hall, the guy snarls at Ian that he shouldn't have asked him to come. Ian insists everything's fine. They storm into the room. Merchant Lauren freezes, whispers Ian's name, then says, "They're not here." "You can start, everyone's here." Ian's father Yoki swallowed his pride, apologized, agreed to re-educate his youngest son and accept any terms, and thanks to Jan the next one steps forward. Negotiations blew past expectations. Jink claps Ian on the shoulder, thanks him, and tells him he can go spend the day with his family, and Ian nods, thoughtful. Turning, Jink screeches to a halt as 2 maids, Mimosa and Angie, step forward and fire the question, has Ian returned? Dzink proclaims he's with his family now, and the girls' faces fall. They'll miss him today because he's unbearably handsome. They shove Mr. D's Inca letter into his hand. He fumbles, jaw-dropping. It's from Chris. Jink rips it open and reads a request. Come to Brando's mansion. 2 slaves, Ariosa and Esther, want to see him. A stunned scream rips from the guy as Dan and Dzing trade savage blows in a fierce brawl. At Braldo's mansion in the royal capital of Coralta, Jink charges up to Chris and drops the bomb. DZINK is of Royal B. Blood. Jink glares at Chris, horror burning in his eyes. He demands what the man means, and the man snaps that it's no wonder he didn't know, then asks. He slams for silence, then hurls the revelation. Dzinki is King Rosalt's illegitimate son. Then he begins to explain the people found out about this, and the Rosalt family imploded into utter chaos. Turmoil roils inside him as Will, Karen, and the Bogark storm into Wave to confront Dzink, shouting that they're with Elsa. And Esther too. An evil voice roared that he wanted to see them. He flings the door open and sees Elsa and Esther, clad in rags, slumped on the floor. They crash to their knees, bowing low before him. Terror explodes from Jink as they scream, who did this to them? Karen storms in and declares it's their choice. They snap back, insisting it was their will alone. They slammed it off limits, declaring it punishment and an apology to you. Jink shot back, demanding that apology again. Mr. Will grits his teeth, clearly unhappy, but reluctantly agrees to tell you. Will rewind and lay out exactly what happened before. He clutches his head and groans that this is all unbearably difficult, apologizes for the trouble, and Karen chuckles, admitting she liked Esther in the maid costume. Dzianke turns to Elsa and Esther, relief blazing in his eyes as he declares he's glad they're all right, soothes their trembling, vows he's not angry and won't punish them, then urges them to lift their heads. Mrs. Karen orders fixed her with a stare and asked her to apologize to Jink. The guy is following orders, Dinkerman. He kept repeating, "Don't worry, To them, since they hadn't done anything wrong, he pleaded with Esther, voice trembling, not to call him. Jink rockets to his brother, crashes into him with a fierce hug, and starts shouting. He declares they're brothers, no matter what life throws at them. They remain brothers, and Esther bursts into tears. Elsa follows suit. The Jenga are tasked with caring for them, and he declares he wants to make Esther a commoner, but that's not the best option right now. The papers brand him a slave, but Esther lashes out and vows to be her brother's slave for life, and Elsa backs him, saying that she is. Jinku seethes at their stubbornness, and the instant he learns it, his stats snap and flip, falling into non-land. A cold truth slammed into him: the Crown Prince was his younger brother. Mr. Will bellows that King Rosalta and the Crown Prince have been toppled, the throne sits empty, and the Queen has filed for divorce. Her homeland ripped itself from the Union. An attack on Rosal Tissenley is only a heartbeat away, and they march Aristocrat to the scaffold. He fights back, roaring, "Do you know who I am?" He screams, horror tearing through him as the awful truth hits: he's a non-land. In the royal capital of Ruth, entry into the dungeon is officially sanctioned. Hunger gnaws at a collared man crouched in a dungeon as a harsh command snaps through the gloom: sit still. Whispers rip through Rosalt's royal palace as courtiers demanded why they'd lock him in his chambers, until there is confusion: he's already a prisoner. The king enters the room, the air bursts with delight, calls out to his father, and asks why he should be here. The man, rage blazing in his eyes, slammed his hand into his son. He bellows that if his son hadn't spoken, none of this would have happened. The son, stunned, snaps back: "Why did you hide me?" He bellows he wants no son like this, and keeps pummeling him. Horror slams into the king, leaving him scrambling for answers as bewilderment claws at him. Then a grim certainty settles that this is how it ends, and he pins every fault on Jinka. He vowed to kill him, and that murderous hunger swelled into a roaring blaze. These thoughts explode inside the king's skull. Deezing thrusts the battered armor at Esther and asks if it'll suit him, admitting he grabbed it when the city cast him out, but its level is painfully low. Esther breathes a grateful "I'm fine" as Nina and Jan are asked to flank her and keep her in the middle. Mace, DZNC warns Esther she must surge to that level to conquer the lower floors. Ian's voice tight as he asks if it's normal for a young man to be thrown into orc fights right away. Esther shrugs and tells him not to worry, and he says that in the non-land family, he hunted monsters with the guards, and even on his way to Call picked off low-ranked beasts. He's on the verge of confessing that Karen ordered him to fight in a maid costume, then his voice dies. Wind magic crackles across the East Theat and Jink snaps: "Crank up magic, mana, and Sujutsu." Mina lanes in and asks DZINK if East Theat must gulp down a mountain of potion. DZINK confirms. She spits that he'll also be forced to endure humiliation, and DZINK's face hardens. It's time to head to the maze in Hamel. Mimosa, Angie, and Elsa will guard the house while you're away. Elsa vows you can rely on them. Esther's gut screams something's wrong. She warns you to stay put. Mimosa and Angie urge you not to worry, unsheath towering swords, and vow to unleash the enchanted blade at the slightest threat. Elsa watches, stunned. Zink and Esther burst into the room and sit opposite Mona. She steps forward to meet Esther as a weary Jink asks if anything happened while he was away, and Mona gives a decisive nod. The manager locks eyes with the guy and snaps: "Do you know the mom they named?" Dezink snaps: "I've heard of it. Sometimes a dead soul twists into a monster. Speak the right words and a person becomes the beast you name, sometimes clutching their memories and intelligence," and DZINK's eyes narrow as he guesses aloud: "This can't be happy." Opening, Mona lights up and responds positively, then reveals that the orc general Jink killed turned into a named monster. The young man freezes, jaw slack with shock, while a raging monster snarls, intent on killing Jinka. Reality snapped into place. The boss's general was the named monster. Jink spun to Mona and asked, "Is this?" His difficulty level exploded the moment he took on a human mind. Now we see everything from the girl's side. It screams that it's weaker. This happened because of the... They telegraph every move. You can call their fate before it even unfolds. Every time the monster locks eyes with a woman, every scrap of interest evaporates, even though ranked players can overcome. Before long, everyone dubbed the monster Duroc, the Snag. The 15th floor had thinned out, so by the 16th the queues were already snaking. Mona warns this unleashes a flood of green adventurers into the lower floors, sparks brutal clashes between factions, and lets more and more vanish inside the maze, leaving them in dire straits as the girl finishes by pleading for help. Jink admits he can only weave enchantment and warns them not to overdo it. Mona beams with relief and thanks him. On the 15th floor, Esther unleashes her air cutter, carving a razor gust as she charges the monster. The young man hurls a water balloon. Ian watches in awe as Esther's magic sharpens and they start taking them down faster, and Esther rushes over to thank him. Beaming with joy, Crowed the workout pumped him up. Jinx snapped he'd hoped his attack power would spike too, but the level barely budged because they used magic, and Nina was stuck on one baffling thing: how Esther still refuses to go to the toilet. Even though he had guzzled potion like it was water, DZNK reads her scowl like a map, and the young man knows Esther has learned to endure this. She's used to nobles like him. Esther had cranked Eddie's level up and the boys had rested enough. Jink made the call. They were heading down to the lower floors. Esther snaps they have to take down Orc General Duroc. Duroc's brother warns the beast may be weak but reeks, and Dzink vows he'll strike it down himself if needed, insisting Nina stay out because Duroc goes after girls. Storming onto the 15th floor, the guys. They encounter an orc who explodes. "I'll kill Dzing." A stunned Esther snaps, demanding why the monster set his brother. A name slices the silence as DZNK proclaims this is the reborn Elliot. Jan asks Jinka if he knows him, and the young man answers yes, sneering that Elliot is anything but kind, while the orc stalks forward, taunting that it will kill Jinka. He bellows to the monster he'll defeat it. The beast answers with a roaring fireball, and an attempt to wield that magic fails. The blow slammed into the orc and didn't so much as nick him, because, armed with only first-level fire magic, he faces a swarm of monsters. Its pupils snap into heart shapes the instant it locks eyes with a woman, or at least someone who isn't quite a woman. It's not Nina, it's Esther, a young man who could pass for a girl. DZINK ripped its gaze from the monster and zeroed in on Esther. Tink seizes the opening, drives a savage strike into the monster, then screams at it, "Don't get distracted." Orch bellows the guy's name and the fight explodes back to life. Rage flaring, Jink cleaves the monster clean down its length, ripping it in two. The monster crashes down and Jink staggers back, eyes wide at this meeting. Nina's eyes snap as an egg slips free from the monster, annoyance flaring like a hot ember in her chest. Yan and Jink don't want to take it. Esther tells her brother that the crown prince has fallen. He's convinced the prince was executed. Jinker snaps that an undead soul can twist into a monster. Elliot turned out undead too. The souls of the monsters in Hamel's maze are trapped there forever. He'll be reborn again and again, racking up experience and loot as he keeps slaughtering adventurers. Triumphant after toppling the dungeon boss, the guys erupt in cheers and charge toward the 20th floor's most legendary cave. Ian froze at the sheer crush of people, and DZINK grinned, declaring this place brims with crystals, emeralds, and diamonds. He steps up, promising to hustle for cash. Esther and Nina light up with joy, and they decide to head into the mine for ore. Dzing slams pickaxes into everyone's hands and orders them to hold back. Ore mining is backbreaking, so the guys are switching to hunting crystals. He scans the ground, finds nothing valuable, and insists they try elsewhere. Esther asks why, and he grins. "I used my appraisal skill. There's a whole cluster of emeralds waiting over there." Jink beams, praising his friend. He admits he never even noticed how his friend triggered the grade skill. They step into a different place, and emeralds glitter everywhere, dozens piled all around. Nina squeals, "So many green stones." Esther beams, equally thrilled by the find, and a nearby Jink watches, thinking it's all fun. They're still such children. Children watch as Jinku clutches fistfuls of emeralds with a sinister grin, relishing his own twisted fun. When asked if he'll dig, he nods eagerly. He wants to try, then steps up to the stones, ready to collect more. Jinkwins hones earth magic and rips a gallum straight from the ruined ground, Esther watching with starry pride for her brother, while Jinx warns that holding it devours mana and admits he can't control it well yet, but figures. "We cracked how to use the golem, slam it up as a living shield, then send it straight through traps." A flash of excitement hit Jink. He realized the golem could be sent to tear even more ore from the earth. Jan spins to Jinka and demands, "What's that noise?" People stand there. They split into two camps. Voices thundered as each side claimed the place and demanded the other leave. He can't tell if their strange behavior springs from a hidden secret, and even though they're adults, he bolts to finish the job, this riotous treasure hunt. Ruins swallowed the space as they finally burst onto the 21st floor called Step, and the guys spun, stunned, blurted that this place felt nothing like the maze, like they'd stepped outside. Dzing raves that green cows roam here and their meat is heavenly. Esther notices he actually prefers orc meat, so Nina grills her brothers, "Have you tried it?" And the eldest grins that they only tasted it back when they were aristocrats, since it's a rare delicacy found in just a few places. "Buy it," someone snaps. Nina zips forward asking if they're going to hunt cows. Ian snarls that he's starving, and Jink feels Mona's warning that many never return from the maze, yet they're holding up fine. Suddenly, terrifying, ant-like creatures burst from the shadows and swarm the guys. Roaring, the cow's meat is delicious. Jink lunges at the beast with his sword and cleaves it down. He slams a massive slab of meat at the guys, declaring it will be enough. Nina yells, "My turn," and Esther jumps in, "I'll help." The guys tore into the meal, gushing they'd loved every bite, and Ian broke it down. He announces a white cow standing beside a hulking minotaur, the area crawling with cow-shaped monsters, and the white cow's meat tastes just like the green cow's, while its milk is downright delicious. The minotaur's meat makes you gag, and its axe is a hulking dead weight. Jin tells Esther he's raised his wind magic level. Maybe now he can whip the air into a tornado. A sharp noise jerks Dzink to attention. He whips his head around as one man hauls his injured companion, shouting, "The exit's right there." Jin cuts in, "Everything all right?" The men warn it's better the guys don't go there, and the young man bursts out, "What happened?" One of the men snapped, "Their ants," and panic flashed as they realized this place teemed with them. They'd blundered straight into a swarm. Dzink barked, "Everything okay?" They coughed that only they had survived, everyone else was still trapped in Antle, and the young man realized he'd never had to fight ants before. Jinx urges the men to tell him about the ants while he stitches wounds with healing magic. A man says there aren't many, but they lock into tight lines that are brutal to break, and when asked about weaknesses, he admits their skin is strong. Fire sends them fleeing. Jink knows their luck is cursed, and because his fire magic misfires, they lean on water and air spells. Ants form a living shield around the queen, fiercely protective, and Demand warns they'll have to summon dozens of magicians and march with the clan to reach the 24th floor. The treated man beams, thanks them, and says he feels better, and another snaps that they're leaving and fires quick advice at the guys. Don't count on success. Mr. D's Inc. orders them to bolt for the 24th floor right now, but the guy can't forget about security. They're on the 24th floor, charging straight for the Antil. A brutal vibration ripped through them, and the unit screamed Jinka's name in terror. Out of nowhere, ants erupted beside the children. Panic ignited, and they bolted, sprinting for their lives from the crawling horde. A fearless girl storms the ant line, only to be driven back. Pain rips through her. Jank's mind races, clawing to grasp what they can wield that magic and unleash havoc. There are at least 5,000 ants. He urges them to abandon everyone, insisting that by saving no one they can cheat death. He's convinced Jan's right, but the kids, especially Nina, just can't. Guilt shredded him until he snapped. The young man roared they'd fight and slam potions to even the odds. They charge into battle, and Jink feels every life press on him. As leader, he must hold the line and buy everyone time to get out before it's over. It's possible DZNC vows to stall and snatch the answer away. If the heat turns searing, they bolt, relief crashing over them. The guys unleash a roaring water cyclone and fire off an explosive air tornado. They clash, turning anything within reach into a weapon. Dizing slams the potion and watches the ants surge on without end. Ian rips open an air cyclone. Jink grits his teeth. He can't use fire, but his mana still brims. Yang is somehow holding the line, and the kids need a breather to recover. Dizink summons Esther and Nina to his side, slams a towering wall of water into being, and asks. Dizink bellows, "Don't worry," and urges the children to drink the potion and recover. His mind gnaws at one brutal truth. If they keep this pace, they'll lose their lives, so he figures the only move is to kill the queen, and then the guys will win. A colossal shape looms on the distant horizon as Jin squints and plots every daring route to reach it. He locks onto figures twisted into alien shapes, and his gut snaps. He guesses this has to be the commander of the end. DZINK resolves to give them orc meat and hurls a raw chunk straight at them. The ants were totally mesmerized by it. Buying time, the guy bolts for the commander barely had a moment before DZNK lunged, shearing his head from his shoulders as the ants scattered in terrified chaos. He barked at Ian to unleash wind magic and scatter the orc's meat, strike the commanders if he could, and keep raining ranged spells. Nina and Esther shouted they were joining the fight. The children surged forward, vowing to aid Ian and blast open a path to the queen with ranged magic, and Dizing agreed. He yells for cover, vowing the instant he reaches the queen he'll obliterate her. Royher Ian flings slabs of meat with brutal, practiced force, exactly how he's supposed to. The answer crept up, and Esther and Nina whip up a roaring air cyclone. That guy, a real man. Pfizer rips into a swarm of ants as Ian barrels headlong at the horde. DZINK whips up a spiraling water cyclone and rides it straight to the queen, closing the distance. And now he is already opposite the leader of the ants. Jink zeroes in on the chaos in a heartbeat and decides that it is. That blade will barely scratch. Even with flawless skill, it won't do enough damage. Underwhelming, the guy unleashes a blazing fireball. The queen launches a furious assault. Jink's eyes snap with sudden understanding. Her strikes hit with brute force but flail clumsily, too easy to dodge. He demanded, "How do we damage it?" And in a heartbeat realization slammed into him. Clarity slammed into Jink. He could adopt Dan's tactics. Dan understands that a large body, cramped inside that tiny turning radius, he won't be able to pivot. He has to move now to seize control of the queen. Jink locked onto her leg joint and, voice razor sharp, told you to stay out of it. Ant surged toward the D-Zinc, and Jan snapped at the boys to keep them off Mr. Jingle. "Thank you." They're dwindling fast, D-Zinc strikes. The queen craved destruction and moved to wreak havoc. He rose to claim the throne after the queen, who'd lost part of her leg. She crumpled to the ground. The queen lay nearly legless, practically unable to move. It slams into Jink like a punch. If she loses her sense of touch and her legs, there'll be nothing she can do. He can do it. This guy rockets forward and pounces on the queen, obliterating her until the last spark faded. The answer. They tore away from the queen's corpse. Esther showered her older brother with praise. He said he was just glad they weren't hurt, and Jink's hands trembled as he replayed everything, knowing one slip would have left their corpses in the maze. Mr. DeSink forced out an apology for being too careless. Ian said he was very glad they had. They survived, and Esther shouted it ended in triumph as a cascade of drops poured from the ants. They set out to collect every single item, calling on wind magic and return outside to haul them back, and Esther asks her brother if defeating the A rank will earn him a temporary rank, and the queen, Deezing doubts it. It's moving impossibly fast. He defeated the queen, but the wind felt hollow. A few days at the game of branch of the Adventure Guild, Jink realized the guild would only hand him a lecture. He'd thrown the enchanter's life on the line for nothing. Mono snarled at Jinku, "I'm fighting a swarm of ants." She dropped the bomb that the Jink helped B-rank adventurers from Harp, and they give 3 platinum. They dangled coins as a reward, and Deezing slapped a price on them, 300,000 yen. He blurted, "Is this too much?" And Mona snapped that they'd been saved from evil ants, every cent at market price. This is the price of life. They all knew that without the desync they'd have been killed, so the guy grabbed the girl and thanked her for telling him. Golden seeds as Mona screams that everyone's dying, then snarls that Jink is a priceless enchanter, and she won't hear a word about his death. She confessed she'd asked him to help those people and apologized for risking Jink. He shook his head and said he'd wanted to go there himself. It wasn't her fault. She spins away, shouting she'll call the guildmaster. He's desperate to keep the guy alive. Nina sees Mono erupting with rage, and Deezing says she was worried, and he's worried too. Dan bursts into the room, breathless, reporting he'd heard DZINK had crushed the ants. The man snaps again, ripping into him. He overreached, endangered his friends while saving people, and if he wants to die, he can return to. Ashtray explodes at the man, bellowing, "How dare you speak to my brother like that?" Dan's status as guild head means nothing to him, but DeSync seizes his brother, cuts him off, and sides with Dan, snapping that Ashtray needs to be more careful. The man urges Deezink to rethink his behavior, decides one lecture won't be enough, springs to his feet and proclaims he has an important message for the young enchanter. Deezink looks at Dan in surprise. Dan blurted that the cult guild leader had just contacted him, and the Rosalt aristocrats were already barreling over to summon him. He says 4 people dressed as merchants showed up asking for an escort, and they unmasked one of them as an aristocrat. Dan slams it out. King Rosalta demands the D-Zing back. Esther explodes that they will not hand it over. Jink demanded to know why he'd blurted it out. It was supposed to be a secret. Dan snapped that, by law, the guild would have guarded their privacy no matter who wanted the DZINK, but they turned themselves in. He bellowed that everything should have been done according to the law, proclaimed the guild always neutral in international conflicts, and shoved the whole crisis back onto them, their problem to fix. A problem erupted. Jink locked onto it and resolved to bring it straight to the state king. Someone asked for their names, but the answer never came. Jink believed they'd send a royal delegation to name him Crown Prince. He reeled when he realized they'd slipped in undercover. They called him Marquis Baudinil, the realm's number 2 noble, second only to the governor-general, and he ruled over commoners with ruthless, unrelenting cruelty. Dan assures DZNK, voice steady. Butinil has no idea he's in Hamel. Now Butinil is combing the cap, hunting him down. Those words ignited a plan. He pictured himself drafting letters to Prime in the Holy Scripture, then turning the servants from his house over to Brando's man. Mona jabbed Jink with a question. Did your research suffer when the Harp members said they'd run into ants while fleeing the clash between messengers and those out of custody? Jink shrugged. It barely hurt the research, but when they spotted the coral they halted mining and moved on. She can't ignore it. Even an S-rank Jinku is buckling under this. Maybe she should march straight to the heads of both clients and complain. He shrugs it off, but his mind snaps to the guild. They're getting hit by them too. Damn, he gets it. He springs up, spits that they're nothing but trouble, declares he's done with them, and warns them never to pull stunts like this again. Inside the Messenger clan's house, a sinister man with long blonde hair chugs liquor straight from the bottle and snarls, "Who did the enchanter complain about?" They can't ignore it. This clan isn't weak, it's S-rank. The man keeps bellowing that the fourth squad is short-handed, and he can't order Harvard back. He went with the third squad into the labyrinth, and if he finds out, it'll ruin everyone. The man decides something must be done, warns the others to keep their distance, and begs them not to contact anyone outside custody. Until Harvard returns, in the house of the out-of-prison clan, the man at the head of the table erupts. The guild complained about their clan and the messengers for meddling with the Jinku, and he spits that he doesn't care about territories because there are far more important things at stake. He pierced them with an intimidating glare and announced the Nad's Ark Kingdom had ordered them to kill the Dzink. The out-of-prison clan, a massive band of adventurers, looms over Hamel. Its leaders from neighboring Nads fling scouts into Cal. He presses on, voice tight. Princess Melissa is finding it harder and harder to bring her son. The law slammed into Nazar's hands. Elliot had already banished the deal. He warns the man will be held to haul to Nadsar. He'll hole up in Kola, turning it into a grave threat to their country. The participants of Out of Prison decree the Dzing must be killed. The man at the head of the table vowed he'd kill the Jink himself, convinced every enchanter was more than capable. He'll masquerade as a member of the Messenger's clan, but if it goes wrong, the Jink will mistake them for messengers, his connection to the plan will crack, and the fallout will cripple the Call Kingdom. A few days later, Jinx exclaims that the ant battle blasted their levels sky high. Ian's wind magic vaulted past 100, the Dzink's radar level climbed, and he explains the enchanted items he gave them proved incredibly useful. Dzink erupts with joy, proclaiming Nina has turned 13, and Nina beams as she tells Esther to consider her an older sister. Dzing roars that they've grown stronger, head up to the 26th floor, and once you reach a safe spot, the ants won't bother them anymore. Frost hit the 26th floor, so Jink snapped up warm clothes for the kids. To everyone's surprise, the guys pulled them on, and nothing about them stood out. In our L's Alt and Coda, the weather never marches through 4 seasons. Temperate skies hold sway all year. This run, they're not mining for minerals, they're locking onto the level, and they're already charging toward it. They hit the 26th floor and the cold slams into them. Dzink orders the wind stopped and the heat cranked up, throws up an air curtain and snaps at the others to hurry. No time for long breaks once they face the boss in the dungeon. We have to blitz through these shots, even though it's brutal. Razorfang tigers charge straight at the guys. The battle erupts. Jink unleashes a cascading barrage of water arrows. Young tears the air apart with a razor cutter, and Ian explains that hunting is. The storm ruined their rations so they couldn't eat them. Dzink spots his water arrow shimmering like sherbet. Nina blurts, "What is that?" The guy hatches an idea he swears the girl will love. The crew finally reaches the 30th floor dungeon with a boss waiting, and Yang growls that it took them 2 days to rebuild their physical strength. Before the boss fight, Jink forges a hulking golem out of a heaping pile of leftover scrap metal. The boys gaped at him, shock ripping through them. Esther's out. She asks her brother what it is. He grins, says he wants to try something, and the guys peel off their winter clothes. They peeled off their clothes. The boss's dungeon burned with heat. Something explodes into view before them. Jink snarls that he bites and warns everyone to be careful. He also warns that this monster is fiendishly hard to defeat because you can't face it head-on. The battle rages on as Jink ratchets his magic up to full power. After a tense wait, he finally unleashes a roaring water tornado. He knows that if it doesn't work, he'll have to blind the monster with an arrow, but to Jink's astonishment, the beast collapses. He's smitten, stunned that they actually beat it, and Jink, still in shock, admits the stats had him bracing for a far tougher fight. Esther grins and explains that as the level rises, the enchanter's power surges. Dzink calls out a safe zone awaits next, and Nina exhales in pure relief. She can finally rest. When the guys burst into the new room, the people sitting there gaped in disbelief and aside from. Their wicked glares screamed one thing: these men were either messengers or freshly released convicts. He declares he's lion of the Big Tree clan, snaps at Jinku that the other man even fed him orcs, and warns resting by the messengers and outside the prison is impossible, so they won't risk going there. Right there, Dzink holds out the Bella cow's milk. The people accept it and thank you. The children. The instant they gulped the milk, they crashed into a deep sleep. Exhaustion had them in its grip because the cold zone saps everyone. Even adults can barely withstand it. Jink snaps, "How long have you been here?" and the guy snaps back that they're the third squad, supplying first and second and running the surface link so they can't just walk away. He reveals that 3 squads from other clans storm down to reinforce the first and second squads on the lower floors. DZNC shoots back that he gets it. He's thought about how they sometimes linger for up to a month and probably start to reek. The guy sputters that he gets what Jin's thinking but can't help it. Water keeps them alive. They won't waste it on washing. Dzink snaps back that he'll trade water for every scrap of info about the lower floors. Lion roars that floors 31-35 have become a steaming jungle, while many adventurers are trapped in the icy zones, and even the guilds are now in the dark. Word is one clan is selling the territory's secrets. Jink smells opportunity, craft a jungle map and guide, and they'll rake in serious money. The guide gives. He thrusts the water into Lion's hands and thanks him. Lion replies that he's grateful and sends him off with a firm, good luck. On the 31st floor, the guys halt as DZINK declares it's the jungle zone, and Esther snaps that, unlike the cold zone, this place swelters with oppressive heat and thick humidity. Dzing vows to scour the area, pry loose every scrap of intel, and sketch a map, sell that info and they'll rake in a fortune. He dares the others to bankroll the whole thing. Nina, even though it's tough, says she'd be thrilled if only the suffocating heat would ease up. Dzing snaps in agreement, snatches up the jar, and bellows it's a special. Dzink unveils a special white cow's milk sorbet. A stunned Nina asks what it is. The guy grins. You wanted to know what sorbet is, and says he secretly whipped it up in a safe zone. Nina bites, whoops that it's icy and sweet, and Jan is left speechless by Dzink's sherbet. Dzing fires off instructions to stir sugar into warm milk and chill it to perfection. Explains the white cow's milk is already saturated so no cream's needed, and Yang beams that Jinku can sell this brand new dish. The guy snaps that he'd read about it in a dusty book from the school library. Nina and Esther erupt in praise. The guys hatched a brilliant plan to beat the heat. Wrap a chunk of slime in cloth, shove it in your pocket, or slap it on your head. Jan grins, says that'll make it cooler, and pitches his idea. Mix the sherbet with the cooler and sell it. Jink watches and thanks Ian for being a real man. Merchant watches as Dzing roars at the guys to gear up and orders them to stay inside the radar sweep. The kids' eyes go wide as they tumble into the jungle. Yang points to Jinku, who was talking. A sharp finger to the lips, an unspoken order, be quiet. Jan and Jink froze as they spotted the top men, knuckles white and teeth bared, hissing over who would kill Jink. They said. Whispers say even the king and Princess Melissa are hell-bent on slaying the enchanter at once. He pressed on, confessing the rumors about him might be true, then laid out exactly what the guildmaster had said. Jink snaps rigid, shock scorching every nerve. Ian's right there in the scene. He blurts it out, knowing the guild's boss is Dan. Could Dan be connected to out of prison? Looks like a spy from the NADS Art Kingdom slipped out of confinement. DZINK says not every clan member is a mole, but a few could already be slinking through the maze, hot on the guy's trail. Alarm grips Nina as she snaps. Dan, the guild head, might be a traitor. Dzink hisses at his friends to act normal and hide that they know about the assassination being prepared, then turns to Nina and breathes the words Jan and Esther instantly catch. Their knowing looks tear his act to shreds. Right through her, DZINK snaps at the girl to be more careful. Nina explodes, furious, shouting that it's outrageously rude. She's already 13, you can rely on her, everyone's here. Pora's surprise bursts out. Are the scouts out of prison? Dan snaps back, indignant, I haven't understood a thing in 10 years. They pinned the stony-faced man with piercing stares as Jink snapped, what do we do if the kingdom isn't involved? Then insisted they inform the state king. Mona snaps that if Nadzor dares to attack, she won't let it stand, and Dan snarls that the spy's release isn't the only reason to get rid of them, and the guild stays neutral. He declares he volunteered to enter the maze with the crew. Only concrete, ironclad evidence can crush a massive clan like out of prison, catch them red-handed, and he'll be the crucial witness. Jink racked his brain over why Dan wanted to go, but when the dust settled, the guy relented, and they went together. They press men again, you really don't know anything. He chokes out a resigned yes, regret searing his voice. Esther snaps they'll go together, but first they have to grab food. Dan spins to Esther and snaps, don't you trust me? Vowing that if she does he'll step aside, then tells me he's already on his way and they're leaving tomorrow. He strides forward, convinced he's just been freed from prison, and speaks as if staring down his brother. His brother once planted the idea in his head. Dan burned to be like him. Tired D's Inc. roared that the king's letter was ready at last. He yanked open a drawer and snagged a vial of truth serum, the Golan family's own medicine, the very stuff he'd smuggled out before they exiled him. Could this day finally be here? Jink steels himself to make the move, but Jinkuro's feelings crash over him, still. He knows he has to move, the Eastite's life and others depend on him. The next day everyone assembles. Jinx says it's usually crowded, but Dan cuts them a path through, and the man hides behind a verbal disguise, slipping in the very words people outside prison would use to pick him out. But by the time we hit the 14th floor, Dan's exhausted and pleads, "Do we always barrel through this maze this fast? Slow down, Asia's already past 40. Desink snaps that their next meeting is with the man just out of prison. Time to make some noise. Hold up, Nina's laid out a jaw-dropping table. The guy is. They devour her dishes, raving they're delicious, while Dan sits apart, rage coiling in his chest. Jink flashes a grin, asks the man if he likes surprises, then whips out a jar of truth serum. He reveals what it is and vows to unleash it on every participant the moment they step outside the prison. Desink snaps that the truth serum has to be mixed with water. The guy snarls that once they drink it he'll challenge the man, and Ian and Esther trade baffled looks. Jink roars they'll keep at it until everyone's drunk, but the young enchanter warns the serum's dangerously concentrated and he doesn't know the right dilution, so he steps up to explain. Impairment looming, Esther screams at Zink not to do it. If he drinks the wrong dose he'll feel horrible. DZNG snaps that out of prison has an antidote and they'll pull him away from the serum. He swears it's his first time drinking it, then wagers that if Dan wins, Jink will give him a platinum coin and he'll eat the same food with them. A man warns him this isn't a toy. Jink answers coldly that Dan's the guild leader with business outside prison and they can't trust this stranger because they don't know enough. And Dan, seeing the truth, asks again if they really think he's tied to that clan. Dink fires back with an upbeat reply, even when that positivity lands as rude. Disgruntled, Dan's glare sliced the air as he snapped, "Don't underestimate me, I can drink you under the table." Anything, the guys flank Desinka and Dan, who are. They keep chugging it again and again, unstoppable. Dan's glare sears as he chuckles and taunts the guy, "You want more." Then accusing voices erupt in the man's head and his condition careens out of control. He stands in a strange place, his feet plunged into black liquid as root-like tendrils crawl up his legs and coat his whole body to his face while a voice, pleading to Dan like a brother, asks why Dan didn't stop him. Then he dies. Out of nowhere, a nightmarish face loomed inches from the man's, screaming that Dan had caused it. Guilt clawed at him. He knew he should have stopped his brother, but he buzzed with joy to be a participant in out of prison. Regret tore at him when they parted, but pride blazed for his brother. Years later, they crossed paths again, and the out-of-prison participant staggered under crushing disappointment. News slammed into Dan. His brother had died exploring the maze. Talented members of the out-of-custody stake often vanished, and Dan had dismissed it as rumor until Jink ripped away his denial. The clan outside the prison had swelled into a force too massive to touch. Powerlessness gnawed at him, the sick truth that so many had died because of him lodged in his skull. And thanks to Jinku, he accidentally unearthed the crimes beyond the walls. This time he swore he wouldn't run. Dan roars he won't let them die. He refuses to let Jink and his friends be killed. He shot his eyes open as horror slammed into him. He woke up. Dan staggers to his feet and rasps that he blacked out. The guys stare at him, exhaustion and sorrow carved into their faces. Madness crackled through the room as the man stammered, "Did I do something stupid under the serum?" Then Jink collapsed to his knees, raw and desperate, begging Dan to forgive him for what he'd done. The master forces out an apology. The man snaps that it's his fault. He kept quiet about how to get out of prison. They realize their theory crumbles. The guys wrestle with what those words mean for the guild's claim, and Dan snaps, "Did the guild even say that?" He swore he knew nothing about it. DZINK suggested someone from the past might be tied to this clan, and suddenly Dan remembered. He says that 5 years ago a member of out of prison took a rank up test and carved a deep, jagged scar into him. Dan swears he remembers his smile. Until that moment the man never suspected it was connected. Dzink snarls they have no choice. They must find the killer and uncover everything. The empathy gift is a rare power that only works on foes who have been badly wounded, burns through your mental energy so you can call it only once every 10 days, and lets you slip into their minds to probe thoughts, feel their pain, and pull up the memories that haunt them. They tore through every file and whisper to unmask them, while elsewhere the jungle erupted with strange, urgent stirrings. The freed contestant hurled a taunt, and the others snapped. He'd been trying to worm his way into their heads. Surging ahead of the guild leader, one participant snaps, "Has someone found out we're using empathy?" And the others shout, "How is that even possible?" He snaps back that the guild leader may have attacked mentally, and the participant bristles at how it looks. Someone blew the plot to kill the Jinka wide open, and he barked for every assassin in the maze to assemble. They must kill the Jinka. A participant grabs a comrade and orders them to calm the man who tried to invade the guild leader's mind. He's furious they somehow launched an instant attack. Suddenly, wyverns burst above the participants, colossal dragon-like beasts exploding out of the prison, and everyone is shouting for him to get. The leader roars at a teammate to abandon Jay and flee, but he refuses. Jay's gift, sympathy, is crucial. Without it, they can't pry secrets from the head of the guild. The ringleader bellows that his foes would have torn him apart anyway, and they bolt, abandoning Jay to stand alone. Left alone, he breaks down in tears, his hood never lifting to hide his eyes, while a wyvern looms behind him. It clamps its jaws around Jay, the rest out of the DL. The prisoners who'd been with Jay bolted in terror, as wyverns also swooped down on their heels. Jink and the others burst onto the 26th floor. A guy barked, "It's as cold as ever," and they locked in, deciding to replay every move from last time. Teeth chattering and bones numb from the cold, Dan demands Jinka summon the monster. The guy can't grasp a single word I'm saying. Dan says you can summon a monster that. It shrugs off the cold and hauls a sled like a beast. Summoning a fire monster that looks like a salaman is the smartest move. Jink throws up his hands, "There's nothing I can do." Dan snaps, exasperated, "How did we ever pass this level back then?" The young enchanter grins, says he first wove an air curtain, conjures it on the spot, and hands out lanterns to warm everyone. Jink presses on, insisting brute strength and blazing fire will handle the rest. Dan freezes, disbelief cracking his voice. "Are you serious?" He bellows that his fire magic has surged. He's getting stronger now. This is it. Disappointment like lead in his chest, Dan accepts there's no other choice. Deezing tells him the man is better than yesterday, and the guy asks Dan to keep the magic steady and look around. They burst onto the 30th floor and dive into a brutal, no-holds-barred fight with a hulking monster. Dan scoffs that Toguro-Kanth was crushed without breaking a sweat. These Inc. urges we pull up and plot our next move, and Dan gasps, "Are we heading for the safe zone?" The young enchanter declares the monster will be reborn in an hour. If it revives sooner, every EXP and drop still counts. Nina's already laid out White Cow's milk and sherbet. Esther urges Dan to grab his share if he wants. Dan fires back that Esther's still growing and he has to eat. A man presses Jink for the plan. Jink snaps they're storming the tropical floor to free its trapped lore from confinement, says he's already scouted it, and the man asks if he can use the local territory. Dzink barked that the trees choke visibility here, leaving everyone blind. The enemy can't see either, so we have to overhaul the radar scheme. Dan warns the guild doesn't know everything about this place, points out the released ones are experts at surveillance and scouting, admits he doesn't know what skills they have, and Jinking screams for everyone to race to the safe zone. They plunge back into the shadows, replaying the exact stealthy playbook they pulled off last time. The guys lock eyes with a ring of scowling, disgruntled onlookers. Tension snaps in the air. On the 7th day down on the tropical floor, Dan insists they stash a bath and other supplies in the storage area. Otherwise, the guys would be filthy right now. Esther, concerned, says that's why his brother took the bathroom. Young wonders if they'll ever get out of prison. He knows they'd be hard-pressed to abandon their plot to kill, and DZINK warns the odds aren't zero. He reels at how a week of distraction stole his rhythm and left him not feeling like himself, but fierce vigilance has cranked his radar level up. He strides over to investigate and piles on glittering chains and stacked rings. When Dan asks what the Jink does, the guy shoots back that they're radar-enchanted accessories. He can detect anything across a massive radius. DZINK urges the others to stay close, because using the skill leaves him unarmed. He locks his focus, and the space around him explodes into blinding light. His senses flare as he pins down every living thing in their thoughts. Trees spring up, leaves, mushrooms, frogs, then clan members. Dazing snaps that 4 people who were out of custody are posted at the safe zone entrance, barricading the passage and trapping the guys, while the ones they'd seen earlier aren't on this floor at all but are monitoring the situation. Dzink snaps the murder plan is still unfolding, and Dan warns every word they say could already be overheard. The guy demands the hearing skill to put Dan's theory to the test. Clues screamed someone was trash-talking Nadsar, and a second check showed those outside the prison were stalking them with their eyes, not eavesdropping. Dzink tenses, eyes narrowing. Nina snaps, "What's wrong?" He spits that the clan's thirst. Murders have surged. Dzink barks orders for his plan, stay back and tail the men, and one guy swears they can dress the clown. A young enchanter bounds forward, vowing to twist it into bait. Dan vows to fake a romance with Nina to bait the participants out of the prison. Esther lashes out at DZINK, voice frayed, warning it's dangerous because he's terrified for his brother. Dan swallows his fear and dives in anyway. He confesses the enchantment means if Nina levels up she'll eclipse him, so his gambit is to kick things off by splashing water and faking a training session. The water magic, it's laced with a poison meticulously engineered by the non-land family. Vaporized, it hisses out a gas that fogs your brain and scrambles your thoughts. First, the guys slam down the antidote, but it gives off a faint smell, so Nina whips up food to mask it, and they blast the scent across the room with wind magic. They brace for the clan to burst free from the prison. Nina admits that she is all. Terror slammed into them. The clan wanted them dead. To protect the guys, they'd have to hunt down and kill every participant of out of prison. Jink feels how the world treats slaying a monster and slaying a human as two different sins, and with Nina, village-born not noble, that divide cuts deep. He reassures her with steel in his voice, "We take them alive," then tells her to leave everything to him and just defend herself, and a beaming Nina thanks him and exclaims she'll try. Everything's locked into place. Jink resolves it's go time. Nina leans in and feeds Jinka, her eyes sparkling with an irresistibly cute expression. She boasts her dishes are, as always, irresistible, then smirks that he wants to marry her. Right now Ian chuckles as he watches. Dan gapes dumbfounded and blurts, "What are they doing?" Esther falls silent, stunned. Ian grins and boasts he's also using radar now, so he can hear everything perfectly. Jink sweeps Nina into a fierce hug, his thumb brushing her cheek as he grins. "Not everyone gets to eat delicious food and bathe in the jungle. We haven't seen women in ages." The clan has already spotted Mr. Jinka and is closing in, eyes alight with rage, ravenous hunger twisting them, envy burning in their veins. The water, tainted by that strange substance, spilled and snapped their minds into overdrive. They knew this discovery would help the guys. Dan's eyes shot open at the idea, but he let out a dry laugh and decided they deserved it. Nina reaches up and gently wipes the sauce from Jink's cheek, teasing him about the smear, and he leans in to whisper to the girl that the clan. The guys burst from behind the bush, hellbent on striking them squarely in the back. Menacing figures surge forward, bellowing at Jinku to stop showing off and threatening to take his food and the woman, while Nina and Jinku stare back, utterly weary. People surge toward Daizeng, roaring that he's finished. They exploded into manic cheers, shrieking they'll finally kill him and get out of here. Then he realized Jink and the others hadn't even seen their attack. They howled they wouldn't touch Nina, they'd still need her, then swooned over Dzink's pretty face, claiming they'd need him too. Jink seethed, outraged the poison had warped their minds so badly. People attack from all sides. Jink bursts into action. He hurled himself into the fray to fight them. A blazing fireball hurtles through the air. Nina crumples, injured. A fight explodes, a slash tears a guy's leg wide open, and he screams in raw, gutting pain. Out of nowhere, a lone man lunges and snatches Nina. He drives her into the dirt and pins her beneath him. Dzink notices. With a furious glare, he barked at the girl not to resist. She must be punished, and coldly told Nina to pin all the blame on Jinka. It's his fault. Dzink leaps into action to help Nina. She asks, shockingly calm, "Look, don't worry." Worry forgotten, she drives a brutal kick into his groin, hurls him aside, and spits "scoundrel," as she screams no. A brutal blow knocks out 2 teeth. The girl screams in horror, calling him a nasty pervert. Meanwhile, another guy is about to. He barrels toward her. She hurls a whirling water orb that rockets him backward. Nina keeps the assault coming. She yanks his head and slugs him square in the face, then tears into the men, barking for them to stay back. Watching that, Jink realizes Nina can terrify too. With one blindfold over an eye, he snarls that they're just 2 kids and won't slow him, and just then Ian slips up behind and rips his head open with a savage slash. Dan and Esther charge into the fray, and the terrified crowd reels, stunned that Jinka and Nina have backup. The guys hurl themselves into battle, battering the clan with every ounce of strength. Sorry I can't create graphic gore, but here's a non-graphic rewrite. Dan lunged and struck the man's head with his blade, silence dropping like a curtain. He felt Jinku strip the weight from his body, leaving him featherlight. The guys snatched victory, Dzing. Think offers to snap them back to their senses, but Nina snarls she won't touch them. The guy apologizes she had to handle it herself, and with understanding, says they'll take over and do everything themselves. Jink snaps that she and Ian will set up camp and she needs a bath. She's had it after being groped by filthy men, and Dan shrugs, unsurprised, knowing how shaken someone her age would be. The awake crowd clusters before the desync as a man blurts he's drowning in questions. Answer them honestly, and they'll be resolved in a heartbeat. He downs a slug of truth serum, thrusts the jar forward and orders them to drink. The man he's offering it to spits at Dzink and hurls scornful insults. Esther storms forward and plunges her sword into the man's leg. He screams in agony. Dzink snarled at his brother, "What do we do with the man's task, eternity? Tear off his fingers one by one, gouge out his eyes, but leave the tongue so it can still speak," and the crowd recoiled, screaming for them to stop. Dzink snaps that they're tangled with the Nanan family and that torture was drilled into them from childhood. The guy hisses they inflict pain so the person won't die quickly. Gina snaps, how many more are there? Silence swallows her question, so the guy strides up to one of the. A clan member slams a hand to his head, poised to act. Jink unleashes firemen. He conjured magic and vowed to slowly crank up the heat. A guy warns the skin's paper thin, so the warmth will crawl into the skull and sear his face. DZINK snaps, a clan member can die from pain shock, and there are many other ways too. The man with the menacing glare snarled, if someone needs killing, goblin or human, it doesn't matter to me, kill them. People from this clan cower, terror gripping them, the man who. Flame torched his skull as he screamed at the dink to let go, promising he'd tell everything. Jink snatches the view away. Nana doesn't need to see this. The others used the same thing. El braced himself. Escape wasn't happening. The prison exit stood ringed with guards. Dan's stern video explodes onto the screen, branding the clan members as traitors to the guild. The moment they exit the maze, they'll be hauled before judgment, and their clan will be disqualified. He spat that they'd be tortured and then executed, and demanded they stay silent to avoid making the situation worse. The interrogation thundered on. DZINK stepped in and snuffed out the out-of-prison participants' indignation. Turns out they're not brave enough to sacrifice themselves for Nadsar. This clan was forged by the kingdom of Nadsar to scout and rob the stake. Loot pulled from the maze is sold in bulk to the merchant Nadsar, who also acts as a scout, and they're pushed to recruit skilled adventurers to sap the stake's power, only to be killed once their missions are finished. A man with a wild hairdo and a jagged scar across his face snapped that, by wielding the gift of sympathy, they had trailed Dan's thoughts and pulled the information straight from them. A psychic assault blew Jay's mind apart as he tried to ride the man's thoughts, and Desync froze, wondering when the out-of-prison contestant had slipped into Dan's head. The young enchanter's memory snaps to the truth serum. He realizes the mental taka struck then. Dan whirls on the man with the strange hair and demands if Jay was hurt, then lunges, swinging wildly, and snarls if it's his own. He's to blame. Dan lashes out and strikes himself. Singh lunges to steady him, snapping he'd been far too relaxed. It's all over now, and people can only be judged. The man chokes out an apology. Bring them upstairs and the truth will slam into the open. Everyone will see it, and their time behind bars will finally end. Dan blurts, how do we get them upstairs? Jink grins and pledges they'll figure something out. Something's loose right now, and at this exact moment the second floor erupts into chaos. Other freed participants who'd weathered the vervents huddled tense, and one snapped, in 10 seconds, it's going to be 2 hours. Another verving lunges at them, one of. The contestant fires off where the guys from the second squad caught, and the man only smirks, unnerved, utterly calm, because he trusts his gift of prediction and fears no enchanter. Golems hauled the participants out of the prison, shoving them into large cages with several people crammed into each room, and Dan watched and said he finally understood why Jinkwin had to use golems. The young enchanted forged 2 golem prisons. Those who immediately spilled everything got only a blanket on the cage floor, while those who resisted were left on a bed of small, unforgiving spikes. They split the grub into foul-smelling goblin meat and mouth-watering orc steaks, and for anyone who blurted everything out, the crew slipped in the non-land family's remedy so their heads wouldn't spin. The second group burned with envy at the first. The team lay in ruins. Jan realized Jinx had plotted every step, and a young man shot back that even as the second squad they still held a rank. If they hadn't acted, trouble would have followed. Jinx says he fought tooth and nail but still handed the clan storage-lined underwear. When the stink turned unbearable, I had to fire up an air curtain, and that blew everything into chaos. Esther beams with pride, crowing that it was his brother's idea. Jinx snaps that without a massive reservoir of mana nothing will work. He still has to sustain the golems. Esther insists you should learn from torture too. Dan warns against learning that. Jan's eyes snap to something. DZINK snarls about the first squad's bloodlust. They're coming this way, and Dan snaps. What's the strategy this time? What do I do? The young enchanted bursts in with a report. Prisoners say the first squad's biggest threats are leader Phobos and Neville, and Jinx snaps that topple those two and you've beaten the whole squad strength-wise. You've beaten them all. His level belongs in the second squad, and his secret weapon, evaluation, only sparks to life when the guys step into his line of sight. Phobos, leader of the first squad, devours every last maga in seconds, but see, the future, funnels it into deadly force on the battlefield. DZNK warns that fighters outside the prison can strike from afar, so use your waters to the fullest. He sends Esther and Nina ahead of the prison, and Jink, backing him with magic, says Ian and Dan will attack with spells and urges them to quickly defeat the magician to prevent any remote assault. They all agree. He cradles the enchanted glasses and declares they're for evaluation. Through them they'll uncover the enemy's skills. The first squad snaps into battle-ready formation. the guild that was supposed to stay away refuses to back the operation. Enchanter Dizing strode in and declared he knew everything about the second squad, demanded the first give up now, insisting their slave lives would improve if the clan cooperated. The men braced for a fight and Faba mocked Dizing's tone, sneering he'd hoped to crawl out of the maze and live in peace, then yelled that the guy was finished. The Jink lashes out, unleashing a towering wave that sends the first squad crashing. One participant claws their way back to their feet. But Dizing unleashes an air cutter. Scowling, Phobos drags a hand across his face and spits. I could have predicted this. Surprise slammed them like a thunderbolt. The first squad plunged into the fray as Dan bellowed, "Attack." Attack, they clash, cleaving Dizing flies with a sword. At Phobos, they vowed to bring him down. He sidesteps every strike without fail. A cold realization slams into the young enchanter. His attacks are useless because Phobos predicts every move and even pretends to strike. DZINK snaps that the second squad was right because Phobos is really bad at fencing, and the guys' thoughts jump to Esther and Nina. A pack of discontented first squad members closes in on them. They plummet, leaving the children standing outside the prison. Faba shot up, "What is it?" While a grinning Desink felt victory wash over him. It was jelly made from boiled slime, which he sprayed with a large white. Wave, the first squad ensnared in the trap, screams that it's not fair, Esther replies with a stone-cold stare that it's the one who wanted to kill her brother. Esther unleashes an air cutter and Nina conjures a roaring air cyclone that barrels straight into Danan. They drop the bomb on Jinku, it's over. Jinne, trading blows with Phobos, plies him with booze to test if he'll risk himself to save his friends, and nerves twist in her gut. Phobos forces himself to believe that if he looks away, the dink will vanish. They're going to kill him, panic pins him in place, and he's got no idea what to do. A swarm of guys closed in on Phobos, boxing him in, his gaze snapped around the room, hunting for an escape. Horror seizes everyone as DZINK snaps, use divination, what does the man see in the future? Phobos exhales and says, "It seems." Locked in cages, the captives bellow that the man gave up too easily and vow they'll hand over any information. Esther sneers they already have enough prisoners and witnesses and urges they be tied to trees as monster bait. DZNC snaps they'll still be useful and tells Phobos the finest cage has been prepared for him. Phoebe huddles in a cage as Desink warns they're headed to the 30th floor safe zone where it's freezing, but the guy reassures Faba he will give him warm clothes, he thinks. He freezes as Jink promises to give him all the water he wants, drink to his heart's content. Furious voices from across the way roar they'll remember this, and the guys stand there with the locked people. If golems are carrying your cells, sprint straight to the 30th floor. Ian snaps, the safe zone's moments away. How are you going to explain this to the other clients? Dizink steps up and vows to lay everything bare. Warning scouts still posted there could spark a clash, and he urges them to show everyone this is how it should be, even daring them to turn rival clans into allies. Dan bursts into the conversation, roaring he'll explain everything himself. If he speaks, every detail will be checked because he's the guildmaster. Jink thanks him and urges everyone not to provoke other clans. Out of nowhere, a panicked man barrels in, demanding to know what happened. They barreled into Lion of the big tree. Jink shoots him a grin and snaps, "It's a long story." Ben snaps to Leon he'll explain everything now. Leon realizes this man is the guild's head. The man declares DZINK was hunted outside the prison. Dan snarled they had no choice. This clan's members are murderers, and the ringleaders are performers. People freeze and cages groan, both desperate to know what fate will do to them. The crowd hemmed them in, eyes razor-focused, then a face cut through the throng. One of the third squad stood among the watchers. Phobos' gaze snaps to him. Convinced he slipped into the other plans, he chuckles, sure the third squad will handle everything, and he knows they can't let Jinku move on. This floor is their last shot. Panic clenched Phobos, his pulse hammering, then suddenly these. Zink whips around, eyes snagging on something, and Phobos snaps at him to tell you. He toys with time, the young enchanter screams they'll die too. Phobos' head churns with thoughts of the decent. Death, in an instant the crowd disintegrated into dust. An escaped participant unleashed the attack, screaming that every witness be turned to ashes. He roared, demanding the witnesses and the Desink be burned alive. People vanished, still screaming. Dizing blasted up a towering wall of churning water. A horrified member of Out of Prison recoiled and cried out that the young enchanter had destroyed their clan's honor. Jink's heart stumbles. Can this man be normal after burning his comrades and all the participants beneath the big tree? Jink charges as the man bellows words meant to make the guy die. The enchanter cleaves it in a single, masterful sweep. Gina turns and walks away. He collapses, blood pouring from him. Dan snaps for the remaining escaped prisoners to be rounded up. Kill anyone who resists, he orders. Jink urges Ian to heal the man. Ian nods and bolts to his side while Nina and Esther are summoned to help. The young enchanter flinched. He'd been naive, never imagining how far desperation could drive someone. If he'd seen it coming, the great tree wouldn't have been damaged. The man lies collapsed in a spreading pool of his own blood, crimson spilling across the floor. Meanwhile, Dan corners two guys who swear they had nothing to do with the murder. They're out of custody, but Dan snaps that if they don't want to take the fall, they'll have to bring the others back up. He warns them to never enter the maze and urges them to stick to non-maze quests, menial gigs like cheap work, disassembly, or cleaning. They swore they had no money yet fell to their knees in thanks, like survivors praising miracle treatments and potions. Because of the guys in the towering tree, not a single soul died. Leon snarls that as adventurers they can defend themselves and confesses they're dangerously relaxed right now. Dan demands the injured return to the surface to serve as witnesses, and Leon vows to help. He won't forgive anyone once they're out of prison, then asks, "What do we do with the stake?" Dan leans over the caged prisoners, snarling that their sins have deepened and plotting the harsh sentence he'll hand down. He knows they stole his information, and payback is coming. Everyone files out. Dzik eases their movement by reverting to the old tactic. Bound, Phoba shudders in his cage, looking doomed. The whole squad barrels up to the guys and grills Mr. Desink about how they got there, and he flashes a calm grin, declares it's all good, and thanks them for their interest. Tread carefully, everyone's running on fumes. The caged roar that they're alive. Dzik fires off the question, are the suspected participants out of custody? Desink declares they claim ties to the Nads in our country. A fierce battle erupted and some died, but the man insists there are still enough witnesses left to prove it. The squad leader smirks, vows to take charge of the prisoners and wrench answers from them in interrogation, then turns to Jinku and asks if he'll tell the guild everything tomorrow. He beamed and told the children to rest. They were completely spent. Jinx insisted the battle had been long, and they staggered into the room exhausted. Happy Nina beams that a real bed is pure bliss after a sleeping bag. Jink declares everyone's terrified to be outside of prison, so this million-yen refuge is the safest place. Young points out the country paid for their accommodation so they can stay a month, and Jink laughs he doesn't mind. Frustrated, Esther snaps that they had no warning the attack was coming, tells Serum straight up that remembering the truth is excruciatingly uncomfortable, and the guys, drained but with more to do, decide to sleep so they can tackle it later. A bespectacled man strides up, greets Dzink with a sharp nod, and declares he's the one responsible for this case, Daniel Funko. Jink's jaw drops. This man once served as chancellor, a real big shot. The man forces out a quiet, "Nice to meet you too," and Dan urges him to drop the formalities because Daniel's friendly. Stammering, the former chancellor pleads with Dzink not to worry about anything, while the taut Jink bristles, convinced Dan's unnerving calm is downright rude. Daniel Fonk drops a bombshell there from the same ducal family of Fonk, and Dan snaps that he is born the concubine's son with no money for school. He spent his days swinging a sword in the fields. Daniel says he learned household management as a child and ran Dan's parents' house, and he adds he was the link. Daniel grins and declares Dan was born trouble. The Falca clan eyed him as a prodigy and tried to bind him as their vassal, but he defied them and vanished at 12. He resurfaced as an adventurer in Hamel and even launched his own business. Daniel dropped the bomb that Dan might be fired, so Dan offered to give up and return to the guild. They even had a few positions ready for him, but calling that option good was forbidden, and those roles would do him little good, so he refused. Daniel roars he won't give up. Dzik sees Duke Fonka itching to start back. Dan and Daniel fell silent about them. They'd come to talk to Jink. Daniel reported that every piece of evidence proving the connection between out of custody and the Nazar country had been submitted to the court, asked what to do with the participants, and Jink snarled they should be eliminated so there's no chance of revenge. Dan snaps that, after the clan endured brutal torture and relentless interrogation, their property was seized. He offers to sell every last possession and hand the proceeds to the big tree. Daniel says they will then be formally sentenced in the stake court. Jink pressed him, "How's Marquis Putinil, still digging for info on us?" And Daniel relaxed. The Marquis had already been captured after plotting to seize the Jink servants as hostages, and they'd arrested him for it. He claims the moment they ripped off a few fingernails, he screamed every secret about Rosault and the other aristocrats, while Daniel says that, unlike when he was out of prison, the man had nothing of value to give, and his fate will be sealed after the punishment. Years of NADSAR's savage aggression, Dzink's brazen abduction plots, and Rosalto's shadowy espionage left the country unnoticed. King Kola ordered an attack on NADSAR and Rosalto, and Dan and DZINK reeled in stunned disbelief. Deezing's mind churns over the attack as Daniel coldly reveals it was all staged, and that Muddle's corpse was sent to Rosalina. Victory hinges on seizing Hamel, the stake's largest city, and he warns it's urgent to find a new guildmaster. Dan's being ousted from his post, and Mr. D's Inc. gets slammed with one blunt question: how does he feel? Daniel lunged up to Jinku, apologizing for the delay. Jinku snapped that with Daniel here nobody could speak and reminded him he'd already been told to go to Fonk's house, a trip that stings because, while he hides it, Daniel's been expelled from the guild and stripped of his rank adventurer status. Daniel warns that if Dan doesn't get a comparable post his enemies will smear him, reveals that not only was Dan's information stolen but the breach hit many of Hamel's most influential people. A man asks if anything can be done. Deezing agrees, Dan's good, there's no point in getting rid of him. A guy suddenly shouts he's got an idea, and Daniel leans in to listen. DZINK roars he'll forge a clan. A man slams the question at the enchantress surprise, will you create a clan? And he snaps back a firm yes, declaring he'll consign Dan to the lower ranks as punishment. Dezink lays out the lifeline, petition His Majesty for amnesty and push for a reduced sentence. Daniel nods and vows to sign too, saying their names will give the plea real force. The young enchanter swears he'll bring the man the result in a few days, and the man agrees. A few days later, a seething Dan stalks up to Jinku, grinning as he proclaims he's just an ordinary adventurer who'd be happy to work for Mr. Jinku's clan. Jinku screams, begging him not to push it, but Dan laughs, saying the petition let him plead guilty, dodge punishment, and land forced into the clan for 5 years. Daniel snapped that the guild had no intention of letting someone like Dan go either. He rips the truth out, he volunteered to be fired to contain the fallout, and Jink instantly knows the guild needs a new leader. Mona snaps into view, smiling and giving her blessing, names Kami the interim head until a replacement is found, then drops a bomb. She's married to Alpha, the famed adventurer. Dan wore a deadpan face as someone called out, thanks Jink for doing so much for him, and the guy noticed the embarrassed Dan looked anything but cute. The enchanter fixes Dan with a look and asks what he wants to do, points out the clan needs a name. Dan volunteers to take it on. Jink insists the maids match the capital's rank and strength, nobody minds, and the girls need someone to mend them. He grins and says arm them with enchanted items and charge into the slime dungeon and everything will click. Dan snaps that this must be where Jink grabbed all those magic stones and signs on to help, so Dezink forges a clan and snaps up a sellable mansion in Hamel for their base, scoring a discount since the aristocrats selling it were kin to someone just released from prison. Thus, it was possible to buy a mansion cheap. Dan says resonantly that he immediately wanted a discount. He replies that he is also running out of money because he spends it to help someone. Daniel informs that it remains to solve the case with out of custody. He asks Dezink and Dan to be present in court. The trial is underway. Although this is an initial hearing, the result is obvious. However, Zinku decides to give his word to give evidence. He launches into the tale. While searching the maze's tropical floor, he accidentally overheard members of out of prison plotting to kill him. Then he forced tears and sobbed that he'd been terrified the veteran adventurers wanted him dead. Killen, Dan, Daniel, Mina, Jan, and Esther sit in the trial, cheeks burning with mortification as Ajinka plays way too hard and turns the courtroom into a humiliating spectacle. The court thunders that every suspect is branded ruthless, and after years of brutal assaults on the Cold Kingdom, they make a decision. The court proclaims the sentence, 1,000 lashes, to be delivered with the use. Magic brands tattoos across faces and hands that broadcast the gravest crimes. The court condemns them to a lifetime of brutal hard labor as slaves. That guy, the crowd roared, chanting that he deserved it. Rage boiled in him. He chooses to endure a lifetime of torment out in the world, outside prison. The young enchanter demands, who is that? Dan's voice cuts through. He's the master of the messenger class. Dink's breath catches, it's Howard. Jink locks onto it, this guy's spear is his deadliest edge. Its attack radius outclasses the Jinka sword. Even if the Jinka sword unleashes magic, it still loses. He knows the spearman is a terrifying opponent, just like Esther, but Dezink insists he won't fight him, so don't worry. Howard bellows for sake. He declares any tears spilled beyond confinement will be a snack, and a memory crashes into him. Howard strides up to the clan, asks if they've reckoned with their behavior, snaps that he extracted every piece of information from them. The room collapses into guilty silence. He places a hand on a contestant and says, I'm sorry I had to do that, admits it pains him to hurt others, then declares he'll forgive them if they pay him double this month. A clan member beams, agrees, and thanks Howard. Ding snaps at Dan, did Howard come here on purpose? Dan smirks, yeah, he's just here to flaunt his strength to everyone. Dan declares the messenger holds all the leverage because of him, and not a single clan member complains about It was him, Dan snapped, my turn. He admitted he'd been ashamed to be in the guild, so he had to. He ends his days as the guild's head. A man falls to his knees, begging the clan chief to accept him. DZINK notes the punishments are mild, no stones hurled, no garbage flung. They snapped at him, I warn you, anyone who does this will be arrested by security. Dan says he understands and thanks DZANG. Dan's punishment kicks off as they bind the culprit to the guild's steps for everyone to stare at, the usual public shaming for anyone who's burned the Adventurers Guild's trust, and Esther grabs her brother, whispering, is something going to happen? What? To happen, Dzink insists it won't, but panic coils in him. He's convinced he's about to be. Howard's here, not in the maze. Rumor says he's taking in former members of Out of Prison, so Jin handed Dana a ring crackling with wind magic, he thinks. Trees are involved, alarm flares. Esther whips around to her brother. Former participants of Out of Prison surged in. Howard just unleashed punishment on them. Their next move is a mystery. People are already snatching something. They ripped weapons from their bags and slammed them up into fighting stances. Esther and Zink froze, horror crashing over their faces. Tethered, Dan slams up an air shield as a screaming barrage of weapons hurtles straight for it. Ex-members of Out of Prison howl he's a coward for using magic and must accept his punishment. Deasing strides forward and snaps that during the light punishment, no one may hurl anything at the perpetrator. Jinx snarls that the guild's rules practically force him to dive headfirst into these antics. He roars that they're ripping up the rulebook and betraying the guild. They sneer an apology, is it too much to guess in this crowd, then blow out that they're no longer with Messenger because Howard fired them yesterday, and DZNK's face snaps into understanding as everything clicks. He snaps back, grinning, perfect, let the clan crumble. He says he gets their anger, but an organization that can't even grasp the rules proves it's incompetent. They freeze, words gone. Dink's eyes snap open as a memory hits, the guy says. He'd caught wind that the Messenger clan swept the market and snapped up every broken weapon, and he asks if those are the very things they were flinging at Dan just now. Nerves crackled as they revealed it was a broken weapon taken to be sold after leaving the clan, and Jan snapped that we should comb the shops to see what the Messenger members bought. Jin answers yes, then insists it's not them, you don't have to check, he explains. As they gauged their skills, every weapon refused to line up. If those weapons had been theirs, they'd have been fine. As the men left, Jinx shouted for them to take the trash. One of them, convinced Dan had always been right, grinned and lunged at the chance to take advantage. Inside the Messenger planning house, a man is beaten face first onto a table while Howard angrily roars, "Did you have any other plans?" He roars that he humiliated him in front of Jink, and Fanka has barreled in between them. He snaps that he won't be able to. He rallied his subordinates when one messenger barreled in to declare that not only the enchanter, but the Duke and the weapon shop would stand with him. He warns that if the messenger steps in they'll be ruined, then Howard's eyes flash with a cruel idea. He'll torture the Jinka and revel in the pain. At the Jinka clan house, Yang bursts in and tells the enchanter there's news. He's been banned from visiting the city's gun shop, and DZINK's jaw drops. Ian says he barged in to ask about the messenger, but the room froze. Terrified faces pressed him toward the door and begged him to leave, so he figures someone threatened them. Deasing had brushed Howard off as a fool, then realized he was dead wrong. He thinks someone's trying to strangle our weapons resupply and force us into a corner. Ian drops the bomb that arms and supplies can be bought through his father's Chamber of Commerce, and Deasing concedes. There are massive merchants beyond Hamel and even messengers can't reach them all. Deasing snapped that it was too inconvenient to leave everything as it was, and wondered if he could freeze the messengers in their tracks. Jan urged the enchanter to ask Fonk for help. Jink flashes a wicked grin and calls Jan a villain. Jan laughs and jokes that he's nowhere near it. Jink, the girl who brought this to the TCs, recoiled in terror and screamed, "What is that black aura?" 3 days later, the bombshell drops. The messengers were the masterminds. The streets buzz with people trading the scandal as word spreads that Dazing asked Duke Faka to plant gossip threaded with truth. One of them even admits they did it together, and that once notorious clan is so disgraced Howard can't step into the city to rally anyone, probably holed up at home drowning his sorrows in drink. The gun shop now answers to Duke Fong's merchant, so the messengers can't strong-arm him. Maids weave the tool from crackling alchemical magic, and one of them pipes up, "This is fascinating." The guys resolve to head back to the city, and Dzink reveals that Duke Funk, the very man who stood in the war declaration ceremony against the Kingdom of Rosolt, pushed that plan. Dan asks if he should go with him since the man belongs to his clan, and Dzink answers again. He declares the calm for now but warns the messengers could take revenge, asks the man to stay in Gomel as a liaison and accompany the guild leader. They stand and watch the city, and Dan asks Jink if he's going to the world. He roars the whole country will rush to borrow their power, and swears the enchanter pulled him from the brink and helped scores of people. Dan slammed the truth at Jinku. Even after all that, you're still just a child. In the royal capital, Jink spots a tide of guards forming up and sweeping through the streets in a precise military mobilization. He bursts into the room and hears someone apologize for calling him out right after the test. Dzink snaps there's nothing wrong with it and admits he only wanted to learn more about the world. He scans the room, sees it's packed with heavyweights, and knows this conversation will get things done. The king declares he's prepared a national reward for cracking the clan's secrets beyond purgatory, admits Jink likely already got the guild's prize but this one's from the country, then tells the young man to look as Dzink thrusts a scroll into his hands. He reads it, stunned. It lets him elevate his slaves Yan and Nina to commoner status and even convert their slave contracts into subordinate contracts. Jink understood this was what Duke Funk had to do and obeyed the young man's command. The enchanter, convinced Ian and Nina had suffered enough, vowed to lift the subjugating magic and one day restore them to commoner status. When he returned, Dzink dropped to his knees and thanked the king. He's itching to ask the same for Elsa and the East Sea, but Rosalta's a tinderbox right now, so it's safer for them to remain slaves. That's how they're looked after. As for the situation, in neighboring countries Rosal and Nazar, their alliance shattered, have ignited a war. Kal is massing his forces in 2 cities on Rosalt's border, Kartha among them, and the moment they declare war they'll be ready to strike. Attack. The apartment's border is split by a river. Someone asks if everyone's okay, and Daniel snaps that they're heavily barricaded along the water. Rosalt sits under watch waiting for a fight so no big clash will erupt there, and he adds the kingdom of Kal only accepts adventurers and children who escaped Rosalt. Daniel bellows that Nazar will seize 1/3 of Rosalto's territory. He warns it's a mistake to assume Nazar has the upper hand because they're crippled too. When pressed, the man explains Nazar's army wasn't ready for Rosalt's climate. A plague rips through their ranks, potion use shoots up and supplies run dry. Dzink realizes the rich-poor gap is so vast some places are downright unsanitary, and the king dryly calls this turn of events lucky for the stake. He drops the bombshell. Rosalt already lies crushed and Nazar's ranks are ravaged by plague. The king erupts with excitement. Raise our army and march to annihilate them both in a single thunderous strike. He blurts there's one problem and begs Jink for a favor. An explanation spills out. They stockpiled mountains of potions and drinking water to fight the plague in Rosalta, but every magic bag was gone, leaving them with no way to carry it. Daniel pushes him to mass-produce magic bags, promising they'll be snapped up for top coin if he agrees. Dzink says it's doable, then blinks and asks if the bags are for hauling potions, why lug water when water magic can conjure it? The enchanter grins and says even ordinary soldiers have enough mana for that. The king proclaims they don't need water in their packs, but on the battlefield the mana reserve rules life and death. One sliver of mana can yank a soldier back from the brink. He vows he won't oppose any accessory that can conjure water. Dzink agrees but lays down one strict condition. The king asks again. The young man declares that only the thrill-seeking adventurers and crafty merchants from May City truly crave accessories, insists this nation has no monopoly on them, and the enchanter seals the deal. Once the war ends, the country must sell half of everything he produces to the people. The king plants his feet and swears to shoulder the burden and see it through. Jink's voice trembles with gratitude as he thanks him. Daniel offers to shut down the discussion of Rosalt's invasion and thrusts the conversation into the present. He screams that a family of necromancers is engulfed in raging flames. The Bernhard clan boasts a centuries-old, storied legacy and is blood-bound to the Nazar family. She looms as the kingdom's dreaded trump card, and roughly 100 Bernhards wield necromancy. They churn out as many children as they can, raising only those who show the spark of necromancy. Daniel says they currently have 8 combat-ready necromancers, and you can whittle that number down. The king intones every word weighed. Their army can no longer ignore the mounting death toll. Taking on a necromancer becomes a nightmare the moment any corpse, rotten husk, or clattering skeleton remains. Those bodies can be animated with the same power they had in life, and the undead don't burn a single drop of mana. Dzing's jaw clenches as the truth hits. Burn it, smash the pipes, or slay the necromancer, but each corpse spawns another, forcing them into fights against ever stronger revenants. Daniel says their only hope is patience. The necromancer can burn through his mana if they hold out. The king slammed his palm on the table and demanded Jink's verdict. Jink snapped back. He'll dodge a straight-up clash by conjuring fire and howling winds to briefly terrorize the enemy troops, then torch their military supplies and food and pounce with sudden night raids. Daniel snaps that steady wear and tear will shred the Nazar army's morale. The king grins, calls it a smart, realistic move to fold into their strategy, then apologizes and orders Jenk to fire up D's Inc. and start cranking out accessories immediately. After hammering out more than 1,000 pieces, he collapses into a long, aching stretch, every muscle screaming. His name is. Nina screams that Alexander from Tears of the Dragon is here. They're all converging. Gina's mind snaps to one truth. Dragon tears have been at work in the royal capital ever since they arrived. Alex greets Jink, noting that he has grown a little taller. The enchanter asks a question about what happened. Alex explodes, shouting he heard Jinx forming a clan, then asks the guy to take. Gratitude pours from him as he thanks the past. Jink beams, eager to swell the ranks, and cheers that Alex and the others would be more than welcome, but the man warns there's a chance people wanting to use it will come knocking. Jinkwin steps up to bind a magical contract. Alex shrugs, he's fine with the condition, it fits their situation. Jink asks if Alex deals with the Sacred Flame people. Alex says they get along, and the enchanter assumes they'll be pulled into the war against Rosalto. Alex snaps he'll dive into Hamel's labyrinth and couldn't care less about Rosal, but since it's his homeland he refuses to start a fight there. Jink realizes the Gilded Adventure is already recruiting mercenaries, and Alex is torn. The man urges they wait and hit Maze City later, and the enchanted growls they're locked in battle with a massive messenger clan, so if Alex goes he'll be pulled into the fight. He fires off, "Is this true?" and Jinx nods, "Yes, the tool Dzink forges in his workshop is delivered to Duke Fonk every day at a rock-bottom price. Duke hawks it cheap, and the gun shop is booming. Messenger stands no chance against him. They'll be forced to admit it soon. Dzink declares the clan's payment will undercut the market and vows to file the papers tomorrow, and Alex beams, thanks the young man again. Days later at Cole Castle, where the execution will take place, rumors erupt that people tried to snatch the enchanter, Lord Jink, who settled in their land and even breached their borders illegally. Many now call Rosalto's actions unforgivable. The king thunders that the Nezir Kingdom's spies, posing as released prisoners, launched an invasion, a crime. A man groans, and the king says that the king. They chained him to a stake, silence swallowed him, then the blade fell and his head tumbled free. The kingdom's sovereign seals the sentence with a thunderous cry, "We declare war on Nazar and Rosal." Dzink's existence sparks war. The three Gordos on Rosalt's border are stormed at once. Commander Kola Brando, the enchanter's guardian and leader of Rosalt's forces, quickly surrenders, and Count Brado seizes Cordo outright. At Brando's mansion, Chris greets Jink, shock ripping through him. "I tossed out a quick 'How are you doing?' and two identical guys stepped up in front of Jink, one named Roy Hughes, the other Lewis Hughes. Roy said hello and Lewis blurted he hadn't seen Jink since they met at school. They're twin brothers from the Hughes Knight family and classmates in the Magi department. Dean snaps, "Did the Marquis deal any special damage?" They admit they did, but the young man shrugs and says he's fine. The brothers reveal Jinka's counsel to His Majesty bought them protection. The enchanter demands why they're here, and Lewis declares he'll use this war to shape his future and serve with dignity. He and Chris plan to join the Count's army. Chris fires off a question to Jink about his father's army in Karth. The charmer grins and says yes. He has one question for the man but tells him to speak now, and Chris plunges into the tale. His father has seized Rosalt's weapons and property, and the nobles and dignitaries will be dragged out and publicly executed the moment they're caught. The young man snarls that the Kola aristocrats have rounded up ordinary citizens and forced them into servants and slaves as they plan to decamp after the occupation. A brother insists the children will still go to school and when they grow up be restored to commoner life. Jink growls that if they condemn everyone to lifelong slavery, productivity will implode. He declares that when the war ends they'll storm Ruda, the kingdom's capital, with the army of the people's aristocracy. Once the capital falls, they'll annihilate the soldiers of Rosalt and Nazar. Chris realizes he's about to join the sweep, snaps that he only feels like a true frontliner when he can actually make a difference, and cuts himself off. Soldiers fighting on the front lines must be a... Irritation flared as Jink snapped it couldn't be helped, told Chris he was the heir, and demanded to know what the enchanter wanted to ask. Esther planted herself before Dzink and asked, eyes blazing, what's happening on the battlefield. Dzink declares that once Esther becomes a commoner, she'll join the Count's army alongside Chris. The enchanter pleads with his brother to join the battle against Nezar. A boy stands weeping. Jink tells Esther not to cry and asks if he doesn't like it. The maid standing beside him snaps that the master offended Esther and spits villain. He freezes, terror clawing through him. Tears streaking down her face, Esther tells her brother what's holding him back, and if he tells him to give up his life, he will. Jink recoils in horror and demands to know what he's talking about. The end. The Shandor orders his brother to start racking up battlefield victories right away, insisting that whatever road Esther takes, a military career will secure his future. Dizing pleads to send his brother to the relatively safe Aria Grad, begs Esther to take Ian with her as a security guard, and vows to back them with enchanted items. Eastite finally grasps the plan and thanks his brother. Jink stares at him desperate to go, but fears the king will forbid it, and the enchanter declares he can handle it himself. Esther pleads with Jinka to leave Jan here for his safety. Jinka hesitates, then asks about Dan, who wants to fight Nazar to get out of prison. Esther nods and he thunders that he'll fight so his brother never knows shame. DZINK then enlists Alex and the others, officially forming a clan. He names it Seal and registers it as an A-rank adventure guild, and people start saying Daniel did a great job. In Hamel, inside the Duke of Fonkier's house, 3 men land in close, trading words about something. One of them snaps they should seize the uproar outside the prison to destroy the aristocrats who are their political enemies. Then he starts bragging about grabbing the title Lord of the Maze City. Another cuts in, alarmed. What do we do now that we're drawing too much attention? The third snarls that the child's height is unbearable, vows to exploit his weakness to engineer his downfall as an accident, then storms to catch up with the other man. They snap, "How long are you going to keep us waiting? No one's arrived." He answers, admitting he knows that's disrespectful. The door splinters as Howard Watt crashes through. Foxen snarls, demanding where Funker is, and the men stagger back in horror, shouting, "What are you doing?" while begging to be taken out of here. He spits out the bitter truth, no one will come to help. Howard barked for the man to reveal Funker's whereabouts, and vowed to kill him if he held anything back. The messenger hissed he'd kill him even if he spilled the truth. Shock ripped through ink as he registered a messenger had attacked Funker's house. The man before him shrugged it off and said, "My lord isn't injured, he's in the royal capital, and will meet his majesty at the royal palace tomorrow." The man pressed a paper into his palm and urged him to take it for the full details. Deasing's eyes snapped to the page. The messenger had the arms dealer pinned until the dealer finally bellowed Duke Fonker's name. Messenger guild members swarmed the city. Howard's plots to use both men backfired, and the messenger, driven to desperation, stormed the mansion to force the Duke into silence. Betrayed by the Duke's hand-picked informants among the nobles and merchants, the messenger bolted from home just before the raid hit. Jink lets out a relieved laugh, proclaiming he's glad everything's fine, and that with the mansion empty, the messenger can't do a thing. The man tells him not to worry. He reveals he'd earlier summoned the family's dissident side branches, the ones who oppose his master, and they were discovered. Dead, the man snarled that the messengers had been stamped on the wanted list and would be shipped to Hamel in 2 days. DZNK's blood ran cold as he realized Duke Falker was a terrifying man. He knew the messenger would strike sooner or later, and he turned them into knives to ruthlessly lop off the family's dissenting branches, making others do his dirty work. The guy realizes he could never be his enemy. The man asks Jinka if it's convenient for him to come to the royal palace tomorrow because the master wants it. The young man agrees and asks to convey greetings to the Duke. The bottle shatters. Howard did it. People clustered around him, frozen and gaping in horror. His mind roils with Funker setting him up. He sees them stripped of their adventure status, and at this speed only hell awaits. Escape plans explode through his head. He can't stay in this country. Where's the rest of the story? What lies ahead is unknown. Howard snapped at the boys to gear up, announcing they're heading straight for the Yamato Kingdom, and people cried out again in horror, warning they'll be caught at the border. Howard drops the bomb. Hamel's maze hooks straight into the Yamato maze on the 67th floor. The Yamato Kingdom borders call but feels like another world. A living old Japan where folk clad in traditional Japanese garb move beneath rows of wooden houses. A shocked grunt from Howard's crew admits he never knew the maze linked to Yamato. Howard snaps that Yamato backs coal, and they insist stowaways aren't welcome there. He gasps that the maze is almost impossible to pass, but if they smash through it, they'll escape. Everyone bolts, yelling it's a brilliant idea, and demanding you hurry up and grab food and gear. Howard grits his teeth. He loathes handing over those details, but he can't die now. Inside the maze, Chris, Lewis, and Roy stand as Dan and Elsa shower them with praise, declaring they did a great job and cleaned up everything. Jinx beams at Dan, thanking him for backing the maids, and Dan shrugs with a grin, saying that with so many people, the slime room is barely a problem. Deasing roars that the guys have gotten stronger, still not nearly enough, and with only 1 week until departure, he vows to train them to the limit. They erupt in eager agreement. This might be based on a leveling game. All eyes lock on Chris, Lewis, and Roy as they thunder toward the battlefield. Inside Hamel's Adventure Guild, Dan announces they're finally leaving tomorrow, and Jink confirms it, urging everyone to keep a close eye on Eskis. The guild leader slams the question, will Jinx join the messenger destruction team? Jinx snaps back yes, owning that he's partly to blame for the messenger's confusion and swearing to take revenge on himself, while the girl grins and says he can call her Alpha. Herbert and a handful of messengers bolted into the labyrinth, while the others were rounded up and hauled in for interrogation. Dan slams down the news. People say Herbert slipped away while they slept, and if even an S-rank venture can smash through the maze, he must have dumped everyone as useless ballast. Mona steps up and vows to help the adventurers. Howard's hovering between the 16th and 30th floors. Jinx snaps, he's a lot closer than he thought. Alpha cuts in, no, it's ripping along so fast you can't pin its exact location because observers can pull back too easily. Mona says there's been no word of the messengers slaughtering bystanders inside the maze so far. Their shallow hierarchy and the swarm of watchful eyes might be what's holding them back. Heads up, delving deeper is dangerous, so the boys decide to brand the captured messengers and slaves as criminals and hand them over to Duke Fonker's family as slave soldiers. Da tosses cash from the confiscated property to cover the inconvenience. Dzink nods and says it's all fine. The guy now offers to break it up. Alpha wears a thoughtful, barely concealed scowl, and Jink calls. For Miss Mona, she pressed him, what happened? I'd already been staring at Alf's fierce scowl, and Mona revealed Dan's been swamped lately, so their time together has nosedived. She blurts that they won't see each other for a while. He's being sent to the battlefield tomorrow. Jink cringes, knowing it's entirely his fault, and the enchanter feels he owes Dan for standing by the maids and protecting. Acting as Esther, Jink bolts after the Alpha and yells her name. The Alpha freezes. When pressed about what happened, the young man blurted that he'd told him about Dan and swallowed hard, admitting he regretted sending him there. He'd done it out of selfishness. Jink roared that Dan was of his clan and vowed he'd charge into the battlefield to back him. The girl, calm as moonlight, said the young man didn't need to apologize. Jink jabbed at the box and snapped, it's for Alpha. They gasp, demanding to know, and the young man snaps that it's what Esther pulled from her parents' house. Esther yanks the lid open, then slams it shut, eyes blown wide in shock. Zink snaps, how's she feeling? The Alpha nods, thanks him, and vows he'll use it tonight. Dzink bids his friends farewell with a sharp warning to Esther, be careful, and if it gets too much, come home anytime. Then the enchanter tosses good luck at Chris, Lewis, and Roy. Esther, bristling with resolve, vows to do great things worthy of his brother's name, but Dan slams Dzink on the head, and Dzink protests he was only trying to save the couple from a crisis. So Dan snaps about why the young man gave his wife an aphrodisiac, fumes that he couldn't sleep and his back aches. The man scoffs that help was needless, and Esther, panic rising, demands what Dan is doing with his brother. It's fine. Chris shoots a brisk wave at the enchanter and hollers that they're coming. Jinx vows they will. He vows to hunt down the messengers and demands if the subjugation team will meet here. Ian snaps they should arrive soon, and Jink catches Grimm's words. She whirls, spots a cluster of people and a shimmering fairy, then announces, I'm Ryu Kanon, this is the messenger's extermination team. Dietrich, Benjamin, Joseph, and Sylphid, and beams, nice to meet you. Jink bursts out grinning that he's glad to meet you and thinks. He'd never set eyes on a fairy before, she's drop-dead cute, but the status stamped on her is utterly ridiculous. The fairy roars they'll now pursue the messengers into the maze, and two routes split the path. She tells me I'm to ask Mr. One to choose. Hanon warns they can go either way, but one route is deadly. She seeks Jinka's consent, and he nods, says he understands, and presses for a full explanation of that dangerous path. The fairy reveals a secret second entrance to the maze. It's so deadly nobody's allowed near it, sealed away in the dungeon's basement. A vast chasm gaped up to the 15th floor. Today, on a rare occasion, the seal has been lifted and they're taking the shortcut. Jink slams the question at Ian, did you know about this? Ian shakes his head, voice tight, I'm hearing this for the first time. Kenon cuts in, eyes narrowed, this is restricted info. Only a handful, including senior management, are cleared to know. She insists it's safe to drop down from the first floor, but it will cost them time and money. Then she looks to Jinka and asks which route to take. Jinka frets as Howard sinks lower and lower while the enchanter debates a risky shortcut to catch up, but Jinka rejects that path as too dangerous. He can't bring Nina, so he turns to Ian and asks if they can, and Ian answers they'll be able to make the right decision the moment they try. The enchanter snaps awake, crushes doubt, and charges in to take control. The young man throws out a shortcut. The fairy agrees and warns that if Jinku feels he can't handle it. Convinced they'll return, they set out to hunt down the messenger. They're huddled by the yawning hole to the 15th floor, telling you not to worry because the squad keeps the rope under iron watch. Dazing feels the abyss's deadly pull and knows a fall means no rescue. I tell her the maze is warped, there aren't truly 15 floors. She begs the enchanter to stop. He snaps he won't and vows to do everything in his power, As he descends, Jink reels in horror at how terrifying it is. Howard planted himself and waited as everyone came down. Jink said they'd somehow gotten here. The fairy told him it was a good job, warned that an invisible ceiling sat on the 15th floor and to be careful, and the enchanter snapped he couldn't believe it was a straight line. S-ranks radiate fearless confidence, but Joseph says those calm faces are masks hiding real fear. Kenan says she's heard some savages use the Orchulcom kunai to drop to the ground, shockingly skilled even without wings. DZINK notes that sounds like a compliment from her. The York boss room sits on the 15th floor. No one relaxes. They seize the danger in a flash and surge forward. Now everyone floods onto the pasture's 21st floor as Jan urges Jinka to take a look at something. He zeroes in on two men, snaps, "Did you come from behind the messenger?" then lunges forward and offers to catch you. They surge in to wrench answers out of them. The guys melt into hiding, and Desync realizes they're gravely wounded. The enchanter realizes that when the report lists the usual robberies and murders, the young man instantly assumes the Fonker house was attacked, and the fairy says exhaustion and pain have snuffed out their vigilance. They barreled to the messengers, spun around in terror, and unleashed a raw, panic-stripped scream. The battle erupts. The guys snatch these up. Sylph grabs Dietrich and pleads, "Don't be so cruel to the men, we need them alive for answers." Eddie K snaps at the messengers, demanding to know what they're doing here and where Howard is now. They sneer and snap back rudely, insisting they know nothing. Jink wrinkles his nose at their stench and wonders what happened. "The fairy pleads with you to give it to her." It erupts, spawning imperial slime. Jink and Ian gape, stunned. One messenger screams to be set free as a Nuki's lands on his hand. Blisters erupt as Canon Honeysweet warns the man, "Speak frankly or his right hand will turn to bone, and if it does, he won't be able to fix it for his own money." Jink realizes she really is a little devil, and the messenger begs. It's powering down, and right before it cuts out, it's going to tell us where Howard is. He yells he's in the volcanic zone on the 46th floor right now. Dan's pulse spikes. Could Howard already be there? The fairy warns the deserts and volcanoes across the 40s and 50s floors are merciless, and a poisonous zone snarls ahead that won't be easy to pass. Jink's stomach drops as he finally grasps why May's exploration stopped at the 60th floor. The enchanter glares at the messengers and demands why they're here, and they admit they begged the city for bigger rice rations. He's the only one who eats meat every day. The man boasts that afterward he slaughtered half of them. DZINK's heart drops as he realizes Howard is truly a villain. One messenger confesses he left them behind. They decide to turn back, and a shimmering magic pocket is sewn into the back of his clothes. He claims he once carried a stash of potions, the only reason they even made it here, but he's run dry. Jink spots a stitched magic pocket on the man's coat. He shakes it, and a book thumps out. The enchanter snaps the book open and finds entries about paying for threats, blackmail. Canon declares it a secret ledger and suspects it catalogs every scheme and bribe the messengers cooked up. The man snaps back there his private notes to avoid any mix-up. DZINK's eyes lock on the pages. It's an accounting book, and now he's grabbed the perfect souvenir for Duke Funker. The guys are asked to wait here for a while, join the rest of the squad, hand over the men, and continue the pursuit. The messengers exchange glances. One of them grabs the other's sleeve and pleads, "What will happen to them?" Jake. Think roared that for everything they've done they'll be branded criminal slaves and handed over to Duke Funker, then demanded, "Do you know that Cola started the war?" The enchanter snarls they'll bear the brunt as slave soldiers, forced to fight to the death or at best, condemned to brutal labor, while the fairy promises to entertain them and even let them play with the slime until the squad arrives, and the horrified men howl that it's not necessary. Howard perches on the 46th floor. He slams into his seat and ravenously shovels a mountain of food into his mouth. The messengers fix him with icy indifference, annoyance barely hidden. Howard devours the chicken down to bare bones. He finally reports that he's snapped. One of his men grimly reports their rations are nearly gone, and Howard hurls the question again. He snaps they're cut off with no one to contact and no supply team. A messenger scowls, thinks Howard should eat less, says he can't do anything and admits it's risky, but they'll hunt for a subspecies of the acrobatics. Questions pelt him, were they on the 30th floor? Howard snaps yes, says you can't tell those floors apart, explains the cubs drop magic stones and the boss will almost certainly drop heaps of meat. It'll take 7 days to cut through the volcano and they won't starve. Tired faces lock onto him as he dares to ask if that's a good idea. Howard roars that they must charge forward, there's no turning back now, and snarls that whatever they try, they'll get to you. He roared their motto, declaring them the Order's fiercest messengers sent to fire up everyone's morale. The crowd erupted in agreement and Howard spun around. He felt the pace crater after the 40th floor. Sand and volcanoes make the environment brutal, and the kill command chokes too. Howard's pulse spikes. Jink could join the extermination team, and the trek that devours dozens of days for ordinary adventurers he could tear through in just a few days thanks to the enchantment. He's convinced that taking a shortcut down to the 15th floor will put him practically within arm's reach. After Jink and the boys bolted from the previous area, they plunged back into the chase at full throttle, every thought laser-locked on catching Howard. The guys tumble onto a floor riddled with roaring, erupting volcanoes. They stumble on smudged ashes and blackened stones. Jan says a camp was here. Jinx teases it must be messengers, or maybe other adventurers, and when he grabs a scorched stick it's still faintly warm. The fairy beamed that past the desolate stretch she'd barely seen another adventure, so this ground belongs to the messengers. Jink nods, declaring they need a breather. Dietrich exhales relieved praise. If DZINK hadn't joined, they'd never have made it here. The Sliff beams that they can even take a bath now, and the purpose of exploring the maze has flipped completely. Kenan snaps the levity away, voice hard, demanding the guy's focus. She warns we're not up against just messengers. Powerful Akrockets swarm in, maddeningly relentless. A messenger gasped, stunned. This is the boss layer. Howard snarled that if they took it seriously they'd act, and the messenger jabbed at the man, demanding, "What are you?" Howard snaps that he'll enrage him, then obliterate it on the spot. Howard wastes no time. He roars that the Acrocanator is far stronger and, unlike the original, spits fireballs, and the man barks for everything to be unleashed on his signal. He roars that you must shatter it with a devastating strike. Suddenly a voice rips through the air, calling Howard's name. This guy's a total dick, he snarls and demands I raise my hands above my head. Howard sneered he never expected him to catch up, then spat that the youth in chains had been a fool. Howard roared that Zink would die right here, and vowed to feed the young man to the lizards. The man snarls an order, unleashing the messengers to strike DZINK and the others. Cannon urges you to blitz through every task at breakneck speed. Amid the chaos of battle, Zink rockets straight at Howard. He roars for the boy to die. Jink zeroes in, take out the mages first, and suddenly the guy's expression snaps. Howard plants his feet, refuses to yield, and hurls himself into a savage clash with the enchanter. Jink trusts his spear like a second arm, banking on brute force to crush any counter. He knows one step back will unleash the magicians on him. DZINK whips the air into a roaring aerial tornado. Howard froze, eyes wide with stunned confusion, as Kenyon bellowed to Jinku, "I'll cover you." She declares they are going to boot the remaining participants off the messenger. If they don't have much time, knock them out by knitting, it's faster. Climb members barreled toward Howard. He groaned and urgently asked the man to channel magic into the boss ball, and the man recoiled, horrified, yelling that asking that now was ridiculous. Howard snarls a deadly order, obey or die. The trembling messenger refuses, and Howard lunges, seizing him. He hurls the clothes into the gaping hole and spits, die. Across the screen, Jink and Kenan erupt in horror, crying out that Howard has abandoned his friend. The boss of this floor crawls out of the hole with a messenger clamped in his mouth, then balloons into a hulking giant. Horrified screams explode as they realize it's the boss. A satisfied Howard grins, calls it a small gift for them, and dares, "Will Jink keep catching me?" Ian jolts awake, horror flooding him the moment he opens his eyes. Howard roared at his men to get out. He bolts away as the man bellows, he hopes they'll never cross paths again. Jink and Cannon tail him as the enchanted scream for him to stop. The young man lunges at the boss, wrestling to fend it off while the fairy shrieks in horror, "It eats people." Jink slams a call through to Jan. Jan reports he captured most of the messengers, but a few slipped through, and the enchanter decides to catch up with How. He urges the cannon to split up, vows to hunt Howard down himself, and tasks Fairy and En with taking down the boss. She agrees and vows the instant it clicks for her, she'll sprint over to help. Jink bolts away as Cannon bellows, "Be careful." The messengers plead to be released, and a rough hand yanks one of them by his clothes. Dietrich snaps that if they don't want to be eaten they need to stay silent. A man roars they can handle the boss, and the fairy stepping into battle admits she hasn't unleashed her wind magic at full power in ages. She barrels toward the boss, screaming she'll cut him up. Fairy screams at Dietrich to cover up. A man barrels in to help and pins the monster to the ground. Dietrich's jaw tightens. He knows even amplification magic won't make this easy. With a furious roar, the man cleaves the boss's tail clean off. The guys hurl themselves at a monstrous foe, fighting with everything they've got. The messengers sit bound. One onlooker admires them, another sneers that he won't escape. A member of this clan whips around and locks eyes on the A heartbeat of silence, then more monsters surged in, encircling the messengers. Silt burst into the fray, slaughtered one of the beasts, and spat that they were utterly vile and a constant annoyance. He explains Howard's scheme to make sure he'd get away with it, manipulating his friend into waking the boss. The man glares at the messengers and snarls, "You're worthless to Howard." In the boss fight, Ian rips the air with a razor-sharp slash, once in the love upon. The monster's scream rips through the air. Jan and Dietrich snap their heads toward it, frozen and wide-eyed. Another monster erupts into view. The guy's jaw drops as he realizes it's even bigger. The monster unleashed a blazing fireball from its gaping maw. It's hurtling straight at the guys, Jen. Then Joseph cracks into the comms. The cannon warns we're at a deadly disadvantage by the lava. Fall back and bait the monster out. The guys bolt, monsters swarm at their heels. Jan heals Joseph, Benjamin. A voice points out that if you don't separate the two monsters, they won't be able to win. The fairy urges you to zero in on the weaker one, lure it out, and pull it away. It barreled toward you. The guys snapped into action, resolved to strike back, and unleashed a brutal counterattack. Meanwhile, Howard bolts, sprinting away. He chokes out that Jink is still on his heels, convinced he's run himself ragged and the air's been stolen from his lungs. Howard bellows for the messengers to stop him, but they miss. He slips through their fingers. Dzink rips through the... He slashes one of their arms wide open. He snatches it and hurls it away. The enchanter's voice falls, "You're the only one left," as a seething Howard glares from the sidelines. Dzink snarls that he treats his men like disposable tools, tossing them aside to save his own skin. The young man snaps it's not about justice. He can't forgive someone like Howard, and with fury blazing, he tells Jink that he reminds him of his boss. Howard freezes in disbelief and blurts, "I'm a man." Confusion coils in Howard as the enchanter channels raw energy into the orb, and Howard cuts his sentence off with, "I don't understand why you're saying that." The man snaps at Dzink, "Where are you aiming?" A blinding white flash erupts. A searing burst blinds Howard, but through the haze he still spots Steve. The team bursts onto the scene, scouring the area for Jink, and a man slams his hand down on one spot, shouting. Everyone assumes the young man is here, but he seems gone. Jink stands right behind him, coldly declaring, "It's all over." The Enchanted unleashes a roaring, spiraling water cyclone. A figure pitched forward and crumpled. Kynian burst in, panting and apologizing for being late, and Jink notices they seem to be. They'd actually made it. The fairy jabbed a finger at a human-shaped, glassy slide and demanded what it was, and the young man explained that. Earth magic pinned Howard to the spot. With his last rasping breath, he snarled to Zink that everyone will be killed. A fairy conjures an imperial slime. Howard now lies trapped within its gelatinous form. Decay devours his hands, his whole body. The action unfolds as the man howls in pain, and Jink and Kinnan watch. The young man fires, "Are you trying to kill me?" The fairy snaps back in one cold word, "No." She grinned and vowed to drown him in slime, coating every joint until his limbs were glued shut and he couldn't fight. I'd scream he'll melt Howard's skin and leave him defenseless, DZNK remembers. "She's a little devil," the young man grinned, "so I'm locking the rest of the golems up in my prison." The fairy asks again, declaring it the perfect name, and Jink grins, certain they've locked everything down. A question gnaws at him. Have Esther and Dan already reached Roselt? They're already inside Brando's army headquarters. On the territory of Rosal and Harlots, the army's commander-in-chief greeted his son. Chris shot back that they hadn't seen each other in ages, and vowed that as heir he'd fight so his father would not be ashamed. Chris' father beams at the Hughes brothers, saying he's glad to see them, and that Dan's reputation precedes him. He tells Esther Jink said Dan rose from a commoner in the royal capital to an A-rank adventurer, and Esther beams back. The commander bellows they've occupied Harlots and are erecting a fortress here. Next, they're unleashing an all-out assault on Sarihild. He warns that Nazar's army is there now, a brutal clash about to explode, and Esther watches Rosalto's forces steadily bleed territory. Chris' father warns that Cole's army has seized Rue, the kingdom's capital, and is sweeping through it. It's only a matter of time before it falls. This fight has become an all-out war against the Nazar people in Rosalto. The commander pins his son with a stare and asks if Jink trained him in the maze. The son grins and snaps back yes, he can now wield attacking magic, and the Hughes brothers swagger that on the way here they hunted monsters and forged their bodies. The commander-in-chief fixes the men with a hard stare, declares this will be Chris and the others' first battle, steps forward to offer blunt, hard-won advice, and Chris's father says, "War rages," he implores them not to see the enemy soldiers as human. He snaps that the enemy isn't a mindless creature deaf to words, but a living person with family and friends. On the battlefield, the order is simple: slaughter as many opponents as you can. He says that no matter how battle-hardened a soldier is, the second he takes a life, a razor of hesitation cuts through him, and anyone who can't shed conscience and empathy will eventually become mentally ill. Chris's father pressed them to remember, if your mind ever caves from exhaustion, turn back. Deasing agrees and thanks him for worrying. Esther's convinced a battle hits tomorrow, so she throws herself into relentless training. Suddenly the boy freezes as someone blurts that Dan's a veteran. The first guy laughed that the Hughes brothers are freak talents who will steal every spotlight. The second shot back that Master Chris has grown powerful, so the Brando family will be safe for the next generation. The first then sneered, "Who's Esther?" saying the Count only took him because he's a junior Jinka with S rank, calling him as fragile as a girl and doubting Esther could even fight. The boy overhears the other guy blurt, "I think Esther's actually a girl." Dan cuts into the conversation, snapping, "What did the young people say about Esther?" Panic clenched his throat and he stood speechless until one of the men forced out that they'd go. Esther hurriedly apologized to Dan, who demanded why the boy hadn't told them, and the boy muttered that in his position nothing could be done, while Esther snapped that he'd been used to it since he was in Rosalta. Rosalt burned with contempt for Jink and Esther. Even Brando's soldiers spat on them because Jink fled to call just before the country fell, so hatred was expected. Dan tells Esther he's stronger than the adults now and asks if he can put those idiots in their place, and Esther, not wanting trouble or to tarnish his brother's name, says it's fine. But Dan snaps that appeasement won't work, vows to handle it himself if Esther won't, and the boy insists he doesn't have to take that route. The man presses, "What's wrong?" Esther fires back, "If Brando's soldiers watch him fight on the battlefield, they'll finally get to know him." Dan snaps, understanding sparking in his eyes, "I'll talk to Count Brando." The man rushes in, apologizing for the late visit, but the Count snaps that Esther and Dan arrived on time. He needs to speak with them too. He says he's eyeing Esther for the knights under his personal command so she can earn victories on the battlefield. Esther asks if the Count wants him knighted, and he says DZINK's letters have arrived, cataloging the boy's deeds and abilities. Esther's mind snaps to her brother as the Count insists in trusting him as platoon leader was the right move, but the soldiers won't be convinced even if Esther bears a rank, so the Count asks the boy what he thinks while the Graf treats this as a relatively safe path to victory. Dan snaps that the Count can't ignore the soldiers trash-talking Esther. The Count agrees, vows to punish the worst offenders, but each punishment fans the flames, and he warns sending more enforcers will wreck the soldiers' morale. Esther swallows an apology for the trouble. He snaps, "Don't apologize, this mess is my failed management," owns up and apologizes for being an unreliable adult. The boy pleads with the Count to listen, and the Count says, "Depends on the content, but I won't ignore you." Esther storms up to the Count and pleads with him to let him fight on the front lines in tomorrow's battle. The Count snaps that he expected this, then promises to spell out why they mustn't go through with it. Esther pleads that if he can see his spear in action on the front lines, it will solve every problem, and the Count snaps back that if the boy dies, DZNK will hate the Count for the rest of his life. Dan steps forward and vows to cover him, pointing out the intel shows no known savages in Nazar's camp and insisting this is the best move. The Count falls silent, weighing the offer. He gives the go-ahead, then barks for them to fall back the instant they sense danger. Grins split Dan and Esther's faces. They zero in on the Count, then slip away. A few days before Esther joins the army, Rosalt's slave soldiers erupt into a brutal, all-out clash. Among them stood Gordon Nonland, his mind churning over Howitz. 6 months into being a slave soldier, dread coils in him. The city teeters on the brink of collapse. With that ruined spear, his fate stays sealed. He aches wondering if his Esther son is suffering now. Rumors say the boy was led to the stake with D. Zink. Gordon Nonland can't grasp why the boy would choose to become a slave, and he realizes it's unlikely that Gina treats Esther badly. They'd been on good terms, and then in a heartbeat, everything snapped. A Nassar soldier storms forward and barks for the common soldiers of Rosalt to drop to their knees before the Nassar. The soldiers freeze, jaws dropping, trying to count how many he cut down in a single strike. The commander barks, soldiers and slaves kill the Nassar soldier. Then, like a gunshot, he screams Gordon's name. The man says that he was good at throwing spears, so he orders him to beat him. He nods, but everyone sees he doesn't even know how to fall back. In that equipment, victory is impossible. The Nassar soldier scans wildly and barks for the next man to step forward. The unit's ruins hit him like a verdict, its destruction mirroring the wreckage of his life up to now, Gordon realizes. He lived a hollow life, a puppet under a father who'd murdered his wife, finally broken and reduced to a slave. Rage scorched his veins, convinced his son chose DZINK over him. He won't forgive it. Forgive him, Gordon murmurs in his head, vowing that if fate lets them meet in another world he'll crawl on his knees and apologize. A Nassar soldier screams they're cowards who can't fight without stealing a magician's power. The commander roars that the soldiers must not be fooled and vows they will purge Nassar's army, rotten with corruption and bribery. He orders the 3rd and 5th squads to scale the wall with mithril spears. They surge up, Esther yells to Dan to go, and suddenly they spot the archers. She slams an air shield into place. Dan snaps, "I need to take care of it," and the boy nods. They should command you to unleash crackling magic and obliterate the enemy, while the boys scale the wall. This time Esther unleashes a roaring air cyclone. The boy vaults onto the roof. He bellows for the archers to fire. Esther grins and obliterates their assault effortlessly. The boy slams up an air shield. Dan roars his praise, then asks him to stand down and let him take over. Rage seared his voice as he growled, "Those from Nassar forced me to swallow a bitter sip." People from Rosalt gaped at Esther's move, and one of them vowed they'd carry on with the same fierce spirit. A blaze of glory exploded. The rooftop battle raged on. The soldiers surged forward, roaring with victory. "They've broken through." Dan shouted the wall was clear and asked Esther if he was okay. He said he'd used recovery magic and had no serious injuries. Then Dan spun to the tired soldiers who'd been judging Esther and demanded if they'd seen what the boy could do. One of them nodded. The first chirps a sheepish apology for being so stupid. The second snaps that thanks to them they don't lose so many people. Dan eases off a little. Relief surges. He knows Esther won't sink into that deep depression now, and the man shouts they're racing to the reinforcements waiting in the city. The city roars around them. He leans in and asks the boy again if he's okay. The boy replies yes, and a battle erupts in the city's center. Esther cuts down Nassar's soldiers, grief clawing at his chest as he realizes he and the bank have split up and now must wait in a cramped city square. The boy spots something and bolts toward it, heart pounding as he wonders what's out there. Esther arrives at the spot. He hears frantic shouts, "Stay away, monster," and a wave of dread hits. He can't be here. He bolts to the source of the sound and finds a man skewered by arrows, one through his throat, another in his back, his hand gripping a spear driven into a soldier. Esther's breath catches. It's his father. His thoughts snap to the whispers about Nassar's trump card, necromancy, and a chill hits him. Puppeteering corpses that never tire or ache is far easier than forcing a living arm to obey. "That's me," he insists. "That's not the whole story," and Esther says the horror of moving corpses crushes any will to fight. Her world ruptures, the corpse is her father, and Esther reels, unable to believe she's been reunited with him like this. The man bellows the boy's name, spins to his father and, stunned, demands whether the boy is conscious. Gordon crumples, voice cracking, pleading for forgiveness for being an unworthy father and for leaving no legacy. Out of nowhere, a walking skeleton clutching its own skull shambles up to Esther and croaks, "My grandson, we've finally met." The boy's breath catches. He recognizes the man, his grandfather, a noble army general. Esther, echoing her brother, suspects Nassar hauled off the bodies of the executed. Gordon pleads with his son, asking if there's anything he can do. He warns that if a monster seizes you before your soul crosses over, it can wreak havoc, and Grandpa explains a monster-possessed blade is almost stripped of its own will. He snaps that the boy's father is already dead yet still kills and will soon give his soul to the monster. Then suddenly he cries that the boy comes from an aristocratic family. He must summon the elders' strength. The sun blazed like a warning. Esther must be the head of the country, the boys. He snarls that he still hasn't forgiven him for what he did and swears he'll never forgive him, not even in death. Esther chimes in that he's grateful for the support. The boy kills his father. Gordon is consumed by flames. Esther lunges and plunges a blade into her grandfather, snuffing out his life. He bellows that whatever the boy does, their blood courses through his veins. Shock slams into him. He realizes the two bodies are moving. Proof screams a necromancer lurks nearby. Esther unleashes the presence detection power his brother gave him. Rage tore through Nassar's commander. Two bodies were killed and didn't. A fight erupts. He bellows they're useless. In an instant, Esther explodes onto the scene, unleashing a roaring air cyclone that rips into them and catapults the soldiers skyward. Rosalt's army surges in, hell-bent on finishing them off. Rage boiled in the necromancer of Nassar's army as this child annihilated his forces. It collapses. Esther lunges and drives a spear clean through his throat. The boy's voice cut through the room as he declared to the others, "The enemy necromancer's been keyed." Hilt Jink presses the bottle into his hands with a grateful grin and admits he might not even like it. At the clan house, Luke gratefully accepted the gift, revealing it was a 50-year-old wine from the Alga region, and the giver beamed that he was thrilled Luke had become his rival in the rank advancement exam. Jink declares to Luke he's a powerhouse, admitting that during the exam he actually feared he might die. Luke staggers out of the maze and gasps an apology for dragging Jink into this, and Jink snaps that hunting a rival is pointless. Hamel has no ranked adventurers left. Luke bellows that the Gamel control team was wiped out, every rank adventurer plunged into the maze. The whole nation hails these guys for crushing two evil clans. The country's security has tightened, and now they're Hamel's strongest. Only the Jinka clan can challenge them. Luke urges the young man to strike a pact with the towering tree, swearing he's not there to fight and banning any collusion to monopolize the profits. Luke warns dozens of towering tree volunteers are fighting in the war, and he's bracing his footing so he can spring into action and back them the instant things go sideways. Dizing shrugs it off and promises to sign the contract at the guild later. The group decides to stage an event to open communication between the clans. Days later, word explodes that the Gala's army has seized the royal capital. They immediately order the execution of the king and his entourage, and Jink watches the scene in the Kala Palace through a magic reflection. King Rosalto rained venomous insults on his son, until the son was flung into a seething cauldron and boiled alive. He watched his real father die and felt nothing. Numbness swallowed him whole, and the kingdom of Rosalto fell into ruin. Lloyd Jink thinks he looks like a man who's just had a mountain ripped off his shoulders. It hits him every beat of his heart now belongs to his comrades on the battlefield. Jink prays they're all right. Duke Funker strides up to Dzink and declares he was here. He admits he's haunted with worry for Rosalt, but Call can finally claim the sea he's always dreamed of, and Dzing realizes the real goal was never to spark a war of revenge. Seakol sprawls as a vast nation, landlocked inside the continent and forced to import essentials like salt and water. They siphon supplies from Yamato to meet their needs, seize the seaworth kingdom of Rosalt, and they'll open trade with distant nations and unleash naval wars that will skyrocket their power. After the war, first Princess Najdo, who stormed the battlefield as an army commander, will become Rosalt's new ruler. Dizink asks for only the tiny parcel holding the Rosalt labyrinth. Duke Funker boasts he could grab more. The young man refuses, and when asked what he'll do next, he vows to hunt down new talent. Naina, who spotted the fairy, proclaims, "I'm very nice." She snaps at Jinka, "Who is it?" A tiny fairy flutters forward and announces herself. Her name is Morena. She beams and declares she can't wait to dive into working with them. The enchanter thunders he'll drag this girl into their ranks. She's gifted in magic, especially summoning. Yang and Jink snapped up a dozen slaves to fill servants, maids, and guard posts after the clan's opening exploded their staffing needs, and the enchanter entrusted the maids' training to Elsa. He offers to grant her official commoner citizenship. She strides forward, proclaims thanks to Dzink, and vows she'll continue to serve him. Marina snaps, "Are you sure he doesn't need a cage?" Jink fires back that she can roam free. Nina reels at the cage idea, and the young man says the fairy had once been kept by another fairy. Family, her master locked her in a bird cage, and the moment anything stirred he unleashed violence on the slaves, and most likely, when he was in a better place, he was in a better. Rage seized him, he refused to feed Morena. Dzink reveals this is a deposed aristocrat, ripped from his throne and bound to purgatory. Nina clutches the fairy and demands where her mom and dad went. The fairy's voice cracks as she whispers they died when Nina was little. Nina then faces Marina and asks if she can read and write. The fairy answers no. Nina scoops her into a fierce hug, tears glinting in her eyes, and vows she'll be there to feed her delicious cookies and teach her everything. Jink insists Marina spend the day with Nina to unwind. Then they'll dive into teaching her magic. Jan will handle the boys, and Jink asks them to grab drinks and food for the big tree event. In a heartbeat, the young man's muscles snap tight. He's frozen in place. A lightning-quick premonition slams into him, a brutal glimpse of the future searing into his mind.